commodities are cheap on a historic basis. I own some gold. I'm not buying it now. So yes, I had rather own oil and energy than be short it. Washington says we have solved inflation, so I know we're going to have more inflation if Washington is telling us everything is okay. Young Americans are going to have huge problems. So don't forget silver when you're looking out the window. I own shares in China. So what I would be buying next is more silver.
And how's it going, everybody? Thank you for joining me on this episode of Real Money Talks. I hope you've been having a great week so far, but if you haven't, then you might be at the right place because obviously it's all flowers and roses out there, right? And that's exactly what Jim Rogers and I will be talking about here. Naturally, he is kind of a positive guy. And then right after that, Jim, I am probably going to let you drop off. You can stick around if you want, of course, but I've got two new exploration companies that I didn't know anything about until very recently. And this is going to be the first time, it's going to be their first CEO barbecue, which one of those is going to take me all the way to Zambia to look for sedimentary copper deposits in a partnership with Bill Gates's Cobalt Metals, as well as another partnership with First Quantum, one of the largest copper mining companies out there. And so the second one will then take me back into the US, the silver state, specifically Nevada, that is, where I'll be looking for silver, unsurprisingly, with Silver One Resources. So please use the timestamps that are on your screen right now or in the description or on the time bar, whatever's easy for you, obviously, to navigate this video, or just, stick around with us for the whole conversation like a semi-normal person. I'm looking forward to getting an update on your worldview, though, Jim, and what's been going on out there. But by the looks of the recent interviews that you've been doing and some of the stuff that I've seen online, the market hasn't managed to turn you bullish yet, has it?
Well, I'm certainly not bullish. I'm not bearish. I'm not short. I haven't sold short.
Hmm.
I would, if I had to put a name on it, I would probably say neutral, or probably watching to see how, the markets are at all-time highs in most parts of the world, but I don't see hysteria yet. So I haven't started selling short. I have a lot of cash in US dollars, and I have US dollars because when problems come, people look for safe havens. They think the US dollar is a safe haven for historical reasons. It's not, but they think it is. So I own a lot of US dollars waiting in case something bad happens, which I expect. I don't know when. We'll have to watch your show to find out when.
Well, if you keep coming on more often, then maybe we'll know when. But you say you haven't. I wrote that down as a question. Short question mark. You're not short the market, which is interesting to me. What would it take? What does hysteria look like? What would it take for you to short the market?
Oh, wow. I've seen hysteria lots of times, and I've read about it many more times. When everybody, if you go to the dentist and the receptionist wants to talk about stocks, not your teeth, that's a sign of hysteria. When everybody is leaving their jobs to go into the market, those are signs that have happened in the past. I don't know what will signal it this time. I doubt if I'll get it right, but something will let us all know, even if it's too late, that the markets have peaked. But yes, there are signs of problems now in the US. Some stocks go up every day. People are very, very bullish on everything. If you look around the world, there are very few markets that are not making new highs. That's usually a sign that the end is coming.
I haven't heard it from a taxi driver yet, but a friend of mine just told me that a painter who came along couldn't shut up about crypto. And I don't have the bandwidth to understand crypto and I don't deal with it. But that kind of got me curious. I was like, maybe something's happening.
Well, there is something happening. Everybody's bullish. That's why markets are at all-time highs.
Hmm.
But as I say, I anyway don't see enough to make me think it's time to sell short. But Antonio, I don't usually get the timing perfect. I rarely get the timing perfect. I just hope I survive.
And you've managed to do that, what now? a couple of decades, five, I think, decades you've managed to survive. What do you do though, Jim, when you notice something like that, an overvaluation in a certain market? What do you do? Prepare for its inevitable cyclical correction, as you mentioned. One thing you can do is indeed go short what everyone loves or is being almost tribal about. But the other option is to go long what every one of those people who are currently long the cryptos and Nvidia and the rest of the broad market hate. So what's a sector you can go long right now? What's a hated sector that you've paid attention to?
Well, I mean, if commodities are cheap on a historic basis, stocks are not. I mean, silver, I have some silver right here. Silver's down 40% from its all-time high. That's not hysteria when something's down 40%. Gold is making its all-time high. I own some gold. I'm not buying it now, but there are things in the market that are certainly cheaper than some of the stocks that are going up every day.
The cup that you drink out of, is that a silver cup?
That is a silver cup. I don't know why it's not here. I have to call my housekeeper and tell her to bring me something to drink out of my silver cup.
That's a missed opportunity. We could have talked about silver, but you've no, you're right, and you've said multiple times before that when a lot of people in a certain market are having too much fun, it's time to start getting concerned. Um, and that's why I'm thinking about the contrary. What are markets that nobody's having fun and nobody's enjoying them? Platinum and palladium and other PGEs really, they seem to have fallen out of favor. They're both well, platinum's not down on year, but they're lagging other precious metals. What do you make of them now?
Well, I own an index, but I don't really own platinum and palladium outright. Uh, Partly because I don't know what I'm doing, but also because it seems to me cars and filters are not so in demand as they were maybe 10 years ago. Electric cars have come along, lots of things, technology is changing. Not that I know what I'm talking about, but I do know technology is changing. And maybe that's the one reason we don't need as much platinum and palladium as we did before.
Yeah,
I don't think electric cars use platinum and palladium.
not to the same extent, as far as I understand. Again, obviously not an expert either. But when you talk about electric cars, then you could talk about the nickels and the lithiums. They sure haven't seen a day in the sun for a while, kind of like me. But is it time to get bullish there?
Well, perhaps, as I say, I mainly own the Rogers Index, commodities index, as a simple way to play most of these things. But from what I read, yes, we are going to all use electric cars someday, electric trucks. And yes, you and I both know that nickel's very involved if we're all going to have nickel electric cars someday.
Hmm.
I don't own nickel except in the index, but maybe I should.
Is
I
there
do
some?
own silver and gold outside the index.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there something that you own outside of an index? And so specifically, that's gold and silver right now, you see.
Yes, but I have owned gold for 60 or 70 years. I've owned silver for 60 or 70 years. I'm too lazy to sell it, and I want my children to own it someday. I'm an old peasant, and when things go bad, all of us old peasants want some silver in the closet. We want some gold under the bed because we know that the only thing that will save us in disasters are gold and silver. Not the only thing, but a couple of things.
Is it only physical gold and silver that you own, or have you also gone for adding a little bit of torque to your portfolio with the miners?
I used to own miners. I'm just a little lazy right now to own the miners. I mean, you'll make a staggering amount of money, Antonio, as you know, if you know a company that's going to find gold in Berlin. Oh my gosh, you'll make a fortune. I don't know that company, and it's hard work to find those companies. So I mainly just own the real stuff.
Seeing as how regulations are going in Europe, I wouldn't get too bullish on a company that finds anything in Berlin. Uh,
Well said, well said.
with your bearish outlook on the not bear, no, you said neutral. I shouldn't say bearish. I should pay attention here. With your neutral outlook on the economy, where does that put you in terms of energy bullishness? Do you still like the energy segment?
Well, I know that the world is running out of known supplies of oil. So yes, I had rather own oil and energy than be short it. But I am not short energy now. But I do know that unless something happens pretty quickly, known supplies of oil continue to decline. And that's going to lead to more bull markets in energy in the future. I mean, maybe we're going to stop using petrol. Maybe we're going to stop using coal. We never have. There are people who want to stop it. Maybe we will. But at the moment, I have not shorted coal or oil or natural gas or energy sources.
Well, you seem like one of the few people who haven't shorted natural gas by the looks of the chart, because it's been going through a bear market for, at least in my books, a long time now, which is 2 years, which is not that long. But it's been going through a bear market. Is it time to start getting bullish? That's one of the hated commodities, I suppose.
Well, maybe I should hang up and buy natural gas, from what you say, or maybe I should short it. No, I don't see any reason to short energy sources in 2025, 2026. No, the world is running out of known supplies. Maybe we're all going to go into a terrible recession or depression, and energy use will decline or collapse. I don't see that yet.
I remember last year when we spoke, you brought up sugar and some of the other soft commodities. Most of them have done well, which is also something I will ask you about later on. But sugar hasn't done too well. It's actually down as much as natural gas a year on year basis, down about 20 or so percent, although still in a very decent 5 year uptrend. So it doesn't seem quite hated enough. Do you still like sugar, Jim?
Well, I had rather own sugar than be shorted. I don't have either right now, except in the index. I have owned so sugar in the past. I've been investing a long time. I can remember when sugar was 2 cents. That is not a typo. 2 cents. I can also remember when sugar was 64 cents. That's not a typo. Believe it or not, sugar went from 2 cents to 64 cents at one point. You can have pretty dramatic moves. I am neither long nor short sugar right now. If I had to be something, I'd rather be long it than short it today.
You reminding me of 2 cent sugar reminds me more of how the value of the US dollar has been eroded more than how commodities have performed bullishly. What would I do though? If I got bullish on sugar right now, there's not enough place in my kitchen to stack physical sugar, and I don't know how long that thing goes. So, how do I get exposure to it outside of an index?
You had a bigger kitchen, so you can store more sugar. No, I don't see any reason to short, certainly even to sell sugar right now. But no, sugar has been depressed for a while. But as I said, in my lifetime, I've seen sugar sell between 2 cents and 64 cents. So it's had gigantic moves, and it probably will again. But I have no position in sugar right now outside the index.
Well, if we look at some of the other commodities that have done well since we last spoke, everyday foods like eggs, for example, eggs are up nearly 300% year on year. Tea is doubled year on year. Butter, coffee, orange juice, milk, they've all had decent moves that severely overprint the official inflation numbers. Do you think the commodity segment is trying to tell us that there will be another wave of inflation coming here soon?
Well, if you ask me, yes. And also, Washington says we have solved inflation. So I know we're going to have more inflation if Washington is telling us everything is okay. No, I mean, Antonio, as you know, there's been huge money printing in the last few years, gigantic money printing. And that has always led to inflation eventually. The central bank in America says we've solved the problem. I've said that many times in my lifetime, many times in history. No, the money printing is unbelievable. The debt for the U.S. government is, I, I, I'm glad I'm old. It's a good time to be old because young Americans are going to have huge problems, huge economic problems with the debt in the future. America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and it gets bigger every day. And I can remember when England went through this kind of problem. England in 1924 was the richest, most powerful country in the world. 50 years later, it was bankrupt. America's on that path. As I say, it's a good time to be an old American. It's not a good time to be a young American.
You say that half laughingly, but that is actually something that's been very concerning to me. And I've been trying to go through history and see what is this period like based on what's happened before. And you've been through a lot of these cycles yourself, and I know you've studied the ones that came before your time. What historic period do the last couple of years here remind you of the most?
Well, we can talk about history some more because at least that is real. And what has always happened when countries start losing their currency status, as the British did 50 years ago or whatever it was, um, they start putting on exchange controls. If you want to go from London to Paris, you can not take more than 50 pounds or something. It gets pretty rigorous. It gets very debilitating and onerous for the people who are citizens of that country. And we're talking about England, but it's happened with many countries in world history. And it's very difficult just to be a normal human being in those countries. And it's going to happen again. It will be in the US next time. I will say again, the debt in the US is staggering, just staggering. Something like 40 trillion this year alone is being added to the debt. Now it's an election year, so nobody talks about it. A few talk about it. But I've been around long enough to know that somebody's going to have to talk about it again, because when the market takes over, you don't have to care what central banks say or politicians say, because the market can be pretty vicious and extremely powerful. When the market says, listen, central bank, we don't care what you say. Listen, Senator, we don't care. We've heard this before. When the market is in charge, it's vicious.
Is US the most indebted nation that has ever existed, and not now, just ever in history based on what you know?
Well, I mean, I haven't done that thorough an examination, but from my experience and my extensive reading of history, no country in world history has ever been as indebted as the US. None. And maybe there has been somebody, but the reason we don't hear about them is because they disappeared or they suffered very badly. Yes, Britain went from extremely powerful to bankrupt, but we know about that. It has happened to other countries too in history.
I wonder why I ask you that question, Jim, is because I wonder if the fall is also going to be the biggest collapse of an empire in history too. And we have seen some big ones.
Well, you can remember, or at least some of us can remember, that Britain was very powerful and went completely bankrupt in 1976. I mean, totally bankrupt. The IMF had to fly into London to help them pay their bills. Now, Margaret Thatcher came along and helped bail them out, and she took a lot of credit and she did some good things. But the real thing that bailed out England was the North Sea oil started flowing in 1979. So, Antonio, if you give me the largest oil field in the world, I'll show you a very good time. We'll have a lot of fun. And that's what happened to Britain. One reason Britain is still there because they discovered the North Sea oil, and that saved them. America doesn't have a North Sea oil. We're already the largest producer of oil in the world. I don't think we can get much more. So I don't know what can save the US.
You would think that if I gave you the largest oil field, you can show me a good time, because nature gave my northern neighbors, the Netherlands, it gave them one of the largest gas fields in the world, and they closed it down. So
Well, prices of natural gas went down because there was a lot of natural gas discovered, a lot of exploration. Um, Maybe they'll have to open it up again someday. I'm not in the Netherlands. Drive up the road and ask them.
Do you, I would. No, I should actually. Do you think there's anything to be taken away from the Ming dynasty in China? Is that something you've studied? Because by the looks of it, there was corruption, there was heavy taxation, um, inflation from the silver trade. There was a lack of technological advancement beyond a certain point. There was a lot of technological advancement to a certain point, and then all the previous thing I said, they kind of collapsed the empire together with its currency and everything. Is there something similar happening to the Ming dynasty right now?
In China,
No, in the US.
probably the U.S. Again, I am an American citizen, so I don't like saying any of this, but no country in world history has ever been so indebted as the U.S., and the debt gets higher every day. And, it's not just the debt that's published. There's a lot of off-balance sheet debt in the U.S. I mean, Social Security is not on the balance sheet, but there are thousands, millions of old Americans who have to get paid, who've been promised. Lots of offshore, lots of offshore, lots of offshore or off-balance sheet obligations, which are going to make America suffer.
Hmm.
I'm,
I wish
I'm
we
not trying to scare people. I'm just talking some simple facts. I mean, you can look this up as easy as I can.
and I wish, Jim, yours and my balance sheet could also take off healthcare and pensions off of them. We would have a good time then. Uh,
Oh, my gosh. We could go to Amsterdam and have a wonderful time. Yes.
I think I'd come to you in China actually for a wonderful time. I have a feeling you can show me a better time over there. What would it not China, I meant Asia. And we will talk about China. But what would it take for you to switch sides here though? What does a world in which Jim is bullish on the US look like?
Well, I'm not short the U.S., not
Yeah.
yet, but the U.S. market, as I said, is at all-time highs, and the debt is skyrocketing, and money printing is skyrocketing. That usually comes to an end, and I mean, if the American market goes down 60%, of course I'd have to change my view. It'd be so cheap, very cheap, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't see Washington stopping its money printing. Congress and all the politicians want to spend more money. I mean, they think that's their job to keep elected, being elected. And the way they want to be elected is spend more money. And they do. Unfortunately, history shows you have to pay your bills someday. As recently as 30 or 40 years ago, the US was still a creditor nation. But now we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. That's happened in only a few decades.
Could it be rebuilt? Can the US go back to being a creditor nation?
Can they?
Yeah.
Well, of course they can if we discover the North Sea oil or something in America. But it would take a dramatic shift for America to become a creditor nation again. We were a creditor nation 50 years ago. We had huge assets. Now we have gigantic debts. Maybe a politician would run on a platform and say, okay, we have problems, let's solve it, let's do the right thing. And he cut spending and saved money, raised taxes, whatever he would do. But then the American people would say, wait a minute, we know we have a problem, but this is too much. This is too much pain. Let's forget it. Let's forget it. Let's just have a little bit. And then they'll slip and slide, and 20 years from now, we'll have gigantic debts again.
So
You go
realistically, what
back in history, I don't know any country that's gone from a gigantic creditor to a gigantic debtor without other problems before they change their mind.
so realistically what you're saying is it's not happening. Someone else is going to take their place. who takes the place of the US as a leader of the world, if you will?
Oh, Antonio, now that is the question. That is the question that I grapple with every day. I own a lot of US dollars, and I told you why. I know I'm going to have to sell them sometime, and I don't know where to go then. Yes, I own some silver, I own some gold, but I don't know a currency at the moment that's going to be the competitor, the new competitor to the US dollar. In theory, it should be the Chinese currency, but the Chinese currency is not convertible. You cannot have an international currency that's not convertible. So, and China is making itself more convertible every few months, but it's still not convertible. So I don't know the new competing currency yet. If you know it, don't announce it on the show. Send me an email. Send me a private email because I'm trying to find it.
As I said, I'll just come down to you and then we'll have a good time, and then I'll tell you about it at 3 a.m. You've
Well, I do. By the way, in world history, silver has been more useful than gold in most of world history. I mean, Jesus Christ was sold for 30 pieces of silver, not for 30 pieces of gold. And that's because silver was money in those days and in much of the world. In fact, the American government, when we were set up as an independent nation, we were on a silver standard. It was only decades later that we changed to a gold standard. So don't forget silver when you're looking out the window.
That is a very, very, very good point because it's exactly where I want to go with this. I hear it from many of the guests that I have on here. I read it in all the news. Oh, BRICS this and BRICS that. And we're going toward a gold backed currency, or maybe a digital gold backed currency. And I'm putting it in parentheses for people listening instead of watching. Um, is that real? Is there merit to that whole idea of we're going to see a hard asset backed currency in our lifetime?
Well, we have had hard asset-backed currencies in our lifetimes and for the decades and centuries before that. I don't see it happening now. I mean, many people talk about it, including me, but I'm just afraid that if and first of all, to implement it is extremely difficult and complicated. And I'm afraid that the pain that the world would have to go through is going to be so bad that people will say, wait a minute, that's too much. Let's try the old way again. And it will take a gigantic crisis, in my view, a gigantic crisis for the world to go to a real hard asset-backed currency. It'd be good if we did it. Happened many times, never worked in the long run. Always in the end, it causes too much pain, and the politicians say, okay, let's change. It's too painful, but maybe we'll try it again. I hope.
Who is it painful for? The politicians or the people? Not the same people, in my opinion.
No, they certainly aren't the same, certainly aren't the same people. But the economy gets soft and weak. To have a strict, if you stop spending gigantic amounts of money, which you would have to do on a hard asset-backed system, they would have to stop spending a lot of money. When you stop spending a lot of easy money, many people suffer. The people who've been getting that money suffer, and then the whole system has to start over again. Or they go soft again. They say, okay, we're not going to cause any more pain. Spend your money. We'll lend it to you. We'll lend you as much money as you need.
Hmm. Well, it almost sounds like if I don't use my credit card to buy luxury goods, then maybe I cannot afford the same luxury goods. Crazy idea. Never heard of it before. Um, you've previously also. Oh, go ahead.
No, no, that would be wonderful if we can just use our credit cards and everything is fine. And the credit card company doesn't contact you someday and say, oh, Mr. Rogers, by the way, your credit card is overdue. Put some money on the credit card. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
If they do, if it comes to that, we're in very serious problem.
Well, I was gonna say if you ever come up with with free money, you let me know, and then I might show you a good time in Amsterdam. But Bam Bernanke already came up with free money. It just isn't free money in perpetuity. It's only free money for a good little while.
If I come up with free money, I'm not going to call you. I'm going down and start spending it. It's not on you.
Well, at least a little bit on me.
Okay,
We'll
I'll
talk
buy
about
you a
that
beer.
offline.
You can have two beers.
You've um you've previously also said though that the 21st century belongs to Asia, if I got that correctly. Is that still true, or is still broadly bullish on Asia with a particular affinity for China?
Well, if I look out the window, I don't see anybody else. Uh, I don't see any country rising enough to become the new U.S., the new China, if you will. Uh, yes, if Korea ever unites and opens up, it'll be a great country for a while, but it cannot be the new U.S. It cannot be the new Britain. I just don't see a country. I look every day, I assure you, because I want to find it so I can put money there. I don't see one yet that's strong enough, successful enough to compete with the US and the US dollar.
Hmm. Who's the best contender though? Not there
Well,
yet, but
China is the best contender. It's a gigantic population, gigantic economy, gigantic everything. But China started having debt. First of all, China is not convertible, but even if it becomes convertible, they do have a lot of debt. So they're eventually going to have problems too. I don't see another country, maybe Vietnam, maybe United Korea, maybe somebody, but I don't see anybody. I mean, look at Japan. Japan is staggering debt now. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Japan was a miracle. Now it's got gigantic debt and getting worse every day.
there was a period where people believe Japan is going to be the next US and then it's going to come out of the current situation. Do you think they will?
That Japan will be the next, I
No,
mean,
that it will come out of the current situation, which is worsening every day, as you say.
well, everybody comes out of it eventually, but the Japanese population has been declining for 15 years. The debt has been rising for many, many years. So unless something dramatic happens in Japan, no, I mean, Japan's going to get worse and worse and worse. I repeat, the population has been declining for 15 years. That's rare of any country, unless you have a gigantic war or something. Most countries don't have declining populations, but Japan has for 15 years, and debt goes up every day, not every month, every day in Japan.
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost like living on a credit card doesn't work. But we already talked about that. And you're reminding me though, Jim, that no country is immune, no region in the world is immune to its own cycles of optimism and downfall. Where do you see the next cracks in the Asia century storyline, especially in markets like China that are dealing with some tough economic realities?
Well, history again would show you that the debtors will get hit badly. They always have. I guess you know the debtor nations as well as I do. Look at Japan, look at the United States. The United States is the largest debtor in world history. Japan is racing ahead with its debt. Everybody is. Most of Europe now has big debt, and Japan, China, the Asian nations, most of them are increasing their debt. Yes, Vietnam is getting better. Yes, there are countries in Asia that are getting better or getting less bad. But I don't see anybody yet that's going to be the next America or even
But
the next Japan.
are you currently long China?
I own shares in China. It's one of the few countries that I am long, and I own them because, I mean, I just haven't sold them. The Chinese market went up a lot, then it went down a lot. I didn't sell my Chinese shares, so it's one of the few countries where I still own shares. China and Uzbekistan are the two countries where I still own shares.
I happen to own long exposure to a company in Kazakhstan, and I was talking to its CEO who told me if you haven't been to Kazakhstan in the last 10 years, you haven't been to Kazakhstan. And the same is true for Uzbekistan, but maybe even in the last 5 years. Uzbekistan is apparently changing dramatically. Um, what are you long in Uzbekistan? What's the industry that's
Well,
attractive?
there's not many shares. I basically own the public companies. I'm lazy. It's not as though there are thousands of shares listed in Uzbekistan.
Hmm.
When they started changing a few months ago, there weren't that many shares. There will be more, and I hope I'm smart enough to buy more, but it's not a gigantic stock market. It's not on everybody's list. If you open the Wall Street Journal, you don't see much mention of Uzbekistan. By the way, just an aside, a historical aside, Tamerlane, who you may remember conquered most of the world at one time, was from Uzbekistan. He lived in Central Asia, and he conquered everywhere. In fact, the Japanese word kamikaze comes because there they were, the ships were ships getting ready to invade Japan, and a gigantic typhoon came along and blew them away. And so the Japanese word kamikaze comes from the typhoon, which blew away the evil foreigners and saved Japan. Uzbekistan, when Tamerlane died, they buried him in Uzbekistan, and on his tomb it said, "Here lies Tamerlane. If anybody disturbs this tomb, it will bring great chaos to the world." So there he was buried. Then the communists, the Soviets, eventually took over Uzbekistan, and after the 1917 revolution, and Soviet geologists or archaeologists decided they needed to go and see what was in the tomb. So in 1941, Soviet archaeologists opened Tamerlane's tomb and started going in. That was the day that Hitler invaded Russia. So Tamerlane was right. If you disturb my tomb, I'm going to bring chaos to the world. I mean, it's just an aside. It's not very important, but Tamerlane's been around a long time. Uzbekistan's been around a long time, and they seem to be on the rise again. Not Tamerlane, but Uzbekistan.
Yeah, I hope I hope he's not on the rise. Are you suggesting Uzbekistan goes back to its previous glory eventually?
Well, its previous glory is it controlled a lot of the world. I don't see that happening, certainly not in my lifetime. I mean, it'd be wonderful if Uzbekistan is the next Japan, the next America. We found it. We solved our problem. I don't think that's going to happen that quickly if it happens. But it is a big country. They do have gigantic natural resources,
Yep.
lots of man-made resources. Tashkent, which is the capital, was the third largest city in the Soviet Union. So, I mean, they've had success in the past. It's not a prediction from me, but I do have investments in Uzbekistan.
Hmm.
I am not going to Tamerlane's tomb.
China is an interesting case too, because on one side, I definitely understand the second growth way argument or cause a case, if you will, but uh, of course, on the other hand, we have their continued struggle with the real estate sector, specifically since 2020, which is expected to start turning in 2025. But if those real estate struggles continue to impact their economy, how do you remain long exposure to China without too much real estate risk?
Well, I don't have a lot of real estate exposure. I've never been much of a real estate investor. I do have Chinese exposure, which I've invested in 35 years ago, 40 years ago, and I still own it. Now, America became the most successful country in the 20th century. You probably remember that. But we had horrible problems along the way. We had civil war, we had depressions, we had bankruptcies, we had all kinds of problems. But we became extremely successful. China will have problems too. For what it's worth, China is the only country in world history that's been on top 3 or 4 times. I mean, Rome was great once, Egypt was great once, Everybody, Britain was great once. Many people have been great once, but China's been great 3 or 4 times. They've collapsed 3 or 4 times, but they're the only country that after the collapse has risen again a few decades, a few centuries later. I don't know why. It seems to be happening again.
Do you ever
It's,
mix your thematics, like when you say I want to go long China, but I also know you like farming and the soft commodities. Do you then go long farming in China?
well, that's a very, very good idea. I just have not found the way. There may be a way because I'm lazy. I haven't found it. I mean, go to China and become a farmer. You'll get very rich. The Chinese government will love you. They love agriculture. They're trying to do everything they can to help agriculture. But I'm not, I'm too lazy and too dumb to be a farmer, so it's not for me. If I find agricultural investments, of course I'll make investments, but they're not many. You can buy John Deere tractor, but John Deere tractor is not much in China.
So, well, that's something that you have then found in the agriculture sector outside of China when it comes down to farming. Is that how you get your long farming exposure?
Occasionally, but remember, I mean, I don't have much exposure right now to anything. I am worried about the world. America's had the longest period in American history without a problem. If America's gone so long, that means most of the world has too. I mean, the Japanese market is making new highs after 35 years. That's not a typo. It's down for 35 years. So there are many people doing well now. So when everybody's doing well, I have been around long enough to start asking questions or to get worried. But I'm not selling short, not yet. I'm not that worried.
Well, I think it wouldn't be a beautiful day the day we talk and you tell me, Antonio, I finally started shorting the market. I don't think that's going to be a day to celebrate. You said you are long gold and silver, though, earlier in the conversation. I should have asked then, but which one of the two do you have more exposure to? You said you like silver more. Do you have more exposure to silver now?
Well, a better answer is I would buy silver today. If I weren't talking to you, I probably would be buying some silver because silver's down and gold is not. So what I would be buying next is more silver.
Why silver outside of the performance of silver being down? I think on a year-on-year basis, silver is actually outperforming gold. So why silver?
Well, so I buy nothing. I listen to, answer and buy nothing. Well, I'm not going to do that. The next time I buy something, which will probably be tomorrow, I'm going to buy more silver.
That's very good snippet right there. And Jim, I understand you don't have all day to waste on me, and not until we go to Amsterdam. And I don't know how to transfer 6 decades or 5 decades of investment experience into a half an hour. What this has been 40 minutes of a conversation. But how would you do it if you could go back to your 20 something self right now and give them one bit of investing advice? What would you tell them?
You're not as smart as you think you are. There was a time when I was young and in the business, and oh my God, I was smart. I made a fortune, percentage wise, when everybody else was going broke. And I thought oh my God, this is easy. And if you ever hear yourself saying this is easy, close the window and go home for a while because it's never easy. But I can remember how easy it was and how successful I was. And of course, 4 or 5 months later, I lost everything. I was so smart and so successful that I led me to lose everything. And the main reason is because I didn't realize when I was that young that there are lots of people in the market and they don't know as much as I thought I did. And they make their own mistakes, and that makes the market make more mistakes. I mean, specifically, I was selling short uh, after a great triumph. But what I didn't realize was, the stocks I was shorted all went bankrupt eventually, but I lost everything first because I didn't realize or have the experience to know there are a lot of people in the market who don't know as much as I did, and they just kept buying. So my shorts went through the roof for a while, but I lost a lot first. I suffered first. And that's one of the things I learned about the market. I didn't have much trading experience. The main thing I had to learn was more about markets and more trading experience. So if you're going into the markets, try to learn about trading, trading experience, and what happens to markets, even if things go wrong.
Well, I would agree with you there. I'm not as smart as I might have thought I was 4 or 5 years ago, and gave me the market gave me that message on a platter, not a silver platter, not like your goblet. Unfortunately, there it is, the silver goblet. I knew we'd see it. Uh, but what's the best hedge though for if I realize I'm not smart enough to do any of these things yet, and I need more experience. What is the best hedge for stupidity?
Best hedge for
Stupidity.
stupidity. Brains. Get some brains. Get a smart girlfriend. I don't know. Smart boyfriend, whatever you need. What I have learned is you have to keep learning, studying, examining. No matter how much you think you know, there's more you need to learn. Because there's somebody in the market who knows more than you do, and you have to figure it out. I don't care how smart you are, even how experienced you are. I mean, we all know great investors who have bad patches. So all I can say is keep turning the pages, keep reading, keep experimenting, keep studying, because there's something you don't know that somebody else does. This is, you know, Antonio, you read the newspapers and everything, and this looks like so easy. It's so easy. I could have bought Apple. Well, why didn't you buy Apple if you could have bought Apple? It looks so easy, but my goodness, it's not easy. So there's a lot more you need to learn. We all need to learn.
Hmm. Well, I got married almost 10 years ago now. And funnily enough, that you should mention Apple, that's a time when my wife bought her first Apple computer. And she was like, this thing is great. Maybe we should buy some Apple stock. And apparently, I did marry someone smart and we should have bought Apple stock. Did we, though? I'm not going to disclose that, but we didn't.
Well, your wife should find another husband. That's the answer.
Don't tell her that. I'm not going to let it.
It was a joke, wife. It was a joke.
Jim, I watch all of your interviews and I like diving into the comments section too. And in many of the recent ones you've done, there's basically two large groups of sentiment. One of them says you're far too bearish, and we've touched upon that. But the other one says that the interviewer did a poor job as they kept asking you same old questions. I felt like we had fun in this interview. What did you think? And what could I have done better to make for a better conversation?
Well, I don't know what you could have done better, but I'm happy. I like doing interviews with you because you're a smart guy and you ask good questions. If there's another question you have and you think of it later, send me an email. If I think of an answer, I'll send you an email. No, the thing is, I'll repeat, we all have to know more, but there's always something we haven't thought of. Right now, somewhere in Amsterdam, there's some guys in a garage somewhere doing something fabulous that you and I don't know about. I wouldn't even understand. But whatever it is they're doing, it's going to make a lot of money for them and some people. It's going to hurt other people. And we have to figure it out and we have to find them because there's always, no matter what year you go into the market, there's something new coming and something new leaving, something changing. And of course, what we have to do is find the right change, the good change and the bad change. And I don't have an answer yet, an easy answer. If you know the easy answer, please send me an email. If you go to Uzbekistan and you find some other stocks, send me an email.
If I start a farming company in China, I'm also going to send you an email and ask you to finance me. Maybe then we'll have some fun too.
Well, listen, I've been in fact, I was the first foreigner to invest in China. It turns out I didn't know. And I went into the stock exchange. It was just down a dirt road. There's a lady there using an abacus. Do you know what an abacus is?
Yes.
They were still using, they didn't have computers or laptops or anything, even tabletops. They
Mm.
didn't have they didn't have iPhones. They didn't have anything. There she was using her abacus. She was shocked. She could see a foreigner came in, but she did sell me shares.
Mm. Well, it's
What you need to do is find a new market. Go to Uzbekistan. That may be the next new market. I don't know.
well, maybe, and I ride motorcycles too, as I know you do, and maybe it is a good idea to drive from Belgium to Uzbekistan. I think it would be maybe a longer than a week, probably depending on how often you stop. But I know it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's a long way. Let's see. And I think those you'd probably have pretty good roads most of the way,
Hmm.
and you could do it. And it would be a fabulous trip. Do it. Take
Maybe
your wife. Does your wife have a bike?
she rides with me. We just always
Oh,
ride together. Yeah.
yes. Well, I went around the world on a motorcycle once, and my girlfriend used to ride on the bike with me, and I kept saying, it's a long way around the world. It'd be good if we could take two bikes because we had to take a lot of stuff to go around the world. And lo and behold, she'd never ridden a motorcycle in her life, went down, took lessons in how to ride a motorcycle. Her first trip was around the world into the Guinness Book of Records, the first time she took a motorcycle trip. So it can be done. So maybe your wife wants to learn to ride.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe she should. That is a good idea. And for people listening who want to read about these adventures, by the way, there's many books that Jim has written, and you can go to jimrogers.com if you want to read his books. Just click on books. You're going to see them. There's articles, there's video, there's a bunch of stuff that you can read if you're interested into this. But Jim, thank you so much for investing so much time in it today. This was a great pleasure, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Antonio, it's always fun with you. So tell your wife to learn to ride. Okay.
Well, I don't know about that. We sold our car because the insurance cost was getting a little too high. And I don't want to imagine what she would do to our motorcycle insurance, which is actually quite palpable at this point. If she started riding them, though, anyways, don't want to think about it. Jokes aside, though, Jim, you've already been very gracious with your time. I don't want to lose your entire day there. And thank you so much for doing this. I really greatly appreciate it. And I'm very much looking forward to our next conversation. Glad you enjoyed it as well. And if people want to know more about Jim's adventures and books and everything else, you can go to jimrogers.com to learn more. I suppose everything you want to learn about him. Well, not everything, but some of the stuff are going to be on there. Yeah, you can at jimrogers.com. I'm letting you drop off now, though, Jim, if you'd like to. Otherwise, stick around with me. But I'm going to be moving into the CEO barbecue portion of today's Real Money Talks episode. But not, of course, before you guessed it, my favorite part of every episode. And that's, of course, the disclaimer, right after which I will actually jump over to the CEO barbecue. But before that, there is a warning on your screen right now. There's going to be a couple of warnings on your screen over the next couple of minutes. This is not a part that you skip unless you hate money. You're obligated to read whatever's on your screen, but you're also just better off doing so because this is not just some whatever generic disclaimer. It is an actual warning that will help you potentially not lose money, which is, by the way, the norm and should be the expectation in this sector. That's what typically happens. Money is part of it too. I am here to make money. I make money from the existence of this channel and specifically from companies paying for the production and publication of their interviews. Now, in this episode specifically, none of the companies that you'll see have paid to be here. Those are free interviews, and I'm not being compensated by the companies to publish them. But that doesn't mean you should look at this episode any differently because even the companies that are not paying, they are still likely seeing their participation in this program as a chance to do some marketing. So that should be the first step. You should start by understanding that. Second step, just start or continue on by understanding that most company communications online, whatever it may be, this interview, their presentation, their Twitter accounts, their LinkedIn accounts, when you send them an email and the IR person goes back to you, that is all marketing. That's marketing tools. It is intended to make you like the story and show you the good side of it, right? And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations, because in my opinion, there is a clear conflict of interest, many out there do, and you should be aware of that inherent bias. That bias, by the way, is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. The majority of stuff that you're going to see out there from large accounts, they do that for money. They sell a service. It's a business. That business is not always going to be very clear or clearly disclosed. So it is just safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company-specific content. Just approach it with a dose of skepticism and treat it as paid marketing. Don't treat it as research. Don't treat it as gospel. Don't blindly put your hard-earned money into stuff that you don't understand. Unfortunately, I'm not a magician. The guests here are not psychics, and not even the CEOs. They're not psychics either, even though some of these geologists, they do convince me that they can smell whenever there's more copper in a rock or not. Maybe that's true, but they're still not psychics. So we just don't possess any superior knowledge, but nobody does. Nobody knows what's going to go up, what's going to go down, or what's going to go in circles. Also, unfortunately, try as I may, the show is called the CEO BBQ. It is meant to grill the CEO. Don't send the questions up front. There are no questions off the table, and the companies get no editing rights. And so I'm going to try to ask them the questions that everyone out there is afraid to ask, but I'm not always going to catch all red flags, okay? I'm not experienced enough where you can rely on these things. I'm not always going to know all challenges with the company or all shenanigans that may be going on. And although you shouldn't tell my wife this, I'm not flawless. Matter of fact, again, I still have no idea what I'm doing. I still don't have a long enough track record where I can say, now I know what I'm doing. This is all to say that you should just never blindly. So you shouldn't blindly trust me, but I should just never blindly trust anybody on the internet. And you should do your own research. And as Charlie Munger used to say, if you don't understand it, don't do it. And research, you don't do on YouTube. You don't do it on blogs. You don't do it on Twitter. You do research on setterplus.ca. That's a government official website. That's where the official documents that companies are obligated to publish are published on. That's where you're going to find the company's official financial statements, as well as the management discussion and analysis, the MD&A. You want to go there and read these things. Read even the technical report. I mean, it's not going to hurt you. Maybe you're not going to understand every word in it, but it's definitely going to help you learn. And they're obligated to disclose everything in there. In addition, no guarantees are going to be made here besides one, and that is, I will guarantee you that there will be forward-looking statements in these conversations. These are conversations that are general and impersonal in nature, and they're going to contain hopes for future events that may or may not take place, depending on many different factors, both within and outside of company's control. Please be aware of all these things. Be aware of the inherent risks of investing and the increased risk of investing in non-revenue generating companies. And please talk to someone who's proven to you to know what they're doing and talking about, like a professional investment advisor with a decent, long enough track record, as well as, again, do more research before taking any decisions by visiting setterplus.ca. The disclaimers on your screen right now, as I said, if you don't enjoy losing money, read them, and just be careful out there. Use your brain for a change. With that said, though, I'm going to almost shut up now because I'm going to be going to Zambia for the second time this year. And for the second time, I am unfortunately not going to be looking at elephants and big cats. I'm not even going to be photographing giraffes. And I'm not even going to stop by the Victoria Falls because I am going to the northwestern part of Zambia to look at copper deposits. Luckily for everyone listening, though, I won't be the one doing all the talking today, as I am joined by Adrian O'Brien, the marketing director for Midnight Sun. Midnight Sun is an exploration company listed as MDNGF on the OTC in the US, as well as MMA on the TSX Ventures Exchange in Canada, where an average of about 260,000 shares trade each day. I see a 52-week high of 60 cents and a 52-week low of 19 cents as it stands right now. And there are 165 million shares outstanding, which with today's $80 million market cap means that MMA is trading at about 48 cents per share. In addition to the 165 million shares outstanding, there are 58 million warrants and 13 million options, leaving the number of fully diluted shares at about 236 million. Management here owns about 10% of the company, and there's also a part of it that's owned by institutions, specifically 16%. The last officially filed financial statement on setterplus.ca, which shows me the numbers as of June 30, 2024, has over $8.7 million in current assets on it, partly in cash. So specifically $3.5 million in cash was at the time recorded as it's just cash itself, whereas $5 million was recorded as short-term investments. Total liabilities sat at just about $500,000, about a halfway split between current and non-current liabilities, with account payables making up the biggest part of the current liabilities at about $125,000. In terms of operating expenses, the 6-month period that ended on June 30 this year costed just shy of $2 million when you count everything. But when you take out the non-cash expenses like share-based compensation and depreciations, the cost falls to about $850,000 for the entire 6-month period, which is about $140,000 in average monthly administrative costs. The largest element of that administrative spend were the various forms of compensation. So wages and benefits plus consulting fees represented about a third of the expense. About 28% was spent on investor relations, and about another third covered everything else from travel to legal to offices and so on and so forth. As to exploration and evaluation costs, those get capitalized, so you can find them under Note 5 in the financials, and you really wouldn't find much. They show just about $100,000 in exploration spent for the entire 6-month period, which is, of course, not material, but it was mostly to keep the lights on, keep the licenses in good standing, and the camp running, essentially, as well as some geological consulting and some travel on there as well. So in summary, we've got $140,000 a month that's going into administrative costs and $16,000 going into exploration and evaluation related activities, leaving us with an exploration to administration ratio of about 0.1 to 1, meaning about 85% of the money going into administration and just 15% to exploration. And why that ratio is so much off balance will make sense in a second when we're talking about the company, but it is essentially other parties spending money on the company's projects. As always, though, also please understand that this financial statement is nothing more than a snapshot in time. In this case, it is specifically at the end of June of this year, but it simply shows you what the finances look like on that exact date and nothing more. Finances, though, they're a fluid thing, and math could be hard, especially if you're me. So it is imperative that by the time you're watching this, you visit the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to look at the most up-to-date numbers yourself and make sure you're getting the full picture. For Midnight Sun, that full picture is fully focused on Zambia, specifically the Zambia-Congo copper belt, which is the second largest copper producing region in the world. The project is called Solwezi, if I'm saying that correctly, but well, you can correct me later on, but it covers about 500 square kilometers of land, and it's right next door to First Quantum's 1 billion ton. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that in mine, but it's next to their 1 billion ton mine, where Midnight Sun's work has been focused on near surface oxide copper deposits, with the goal being to find and delineate, of course, at least a 50 million tons oxide copper deposit with an average grade of at least 0.3% copper. Again, not high grade, but we're talking about SEDEX deposits, essentially. One of the target that the company is hoping can deliver part of that resource or part of the resource on their project is Dumbwa. That's a Dumbwa target, which is an over 20 kilometer soil anomaly with up to 0.7% copper in peak values. Similar setting, by the way, to Barrick's Lumwana, and it's also where Midnight Sun it has signed a $15.5 million earn-in agreement with Cobalt Metals. Cobalt, written as Kobold, which is, of course, the Mintech company that's supported by Bill Gates. The partnership allows Cobalt to earn a 75% interest by investing those $15.5 million, as well as making a $500,000 cash payment over the next 4 or so years, with the next step being a 10,000 meter drill program expected to be announced soon. And well, how soon is part of what I'm hoping to figure out later on, so we'll be talking about that. But there's another strategic partnership going on at Midnight Sun, though, and this one is a bit more complicated. not too complicated, but it is with First Quantum, where essentially, and I'm trying to simplify it, but essentially First Quantum will pay for the exploration as well as help out with the exploration in terms of brain power for the potential discovery of a deposit that could serve as feedstock for First Quantum solvent extraction and electrowinning facility, which is just 10 kilometers away from one of those targets that Midnight has here. When I say one of those targets, there are three key targets on this land package, as far as I understand it. That's Kajiba. I hope I'm saying that right. Me too. That's not too hard to say. And then Crunch. And we have a normal name in here too, which is kind of welcome at this point. But Kajiba has already shown oxide mineralization in shallow drilling with highlight grades containing up to 5.7% of copper over a 14-meter interval and 3.15% of copper over a 24-meter interval, as well as an 8-meter intercept containing another over 5% hit. And this is also the target that is currently being explored together with First Quantum, by the way. So there is currently 3,000 meters of RC drilling going on, partial ionic leach sampling, and an IP survey. That's kind of the goal for this year's exploration program on it. With the drilling, of course, being rather shallow, so there's only going to be about 50 meters deep holes on this, on an average spacing of 100 meters between the holes on the peripheral areas, as well as 50-meter spacing over the inner envelope of the known mineralized zone. Again, all with the idea to find something that satisfies First Quantum's SXEW oxide copper processing stock feed needs. Another one of the targets is Me2. This one shows an unusual mix of copper, cobalt, and nickel mineralization, similar to what First Quantum has at the Sentinel mine. So maybe we'll touch upon that later on in the conversation as well. And then there's a third target zone of note here. As I said, it's called Crunch, and the Crunch zone, which is a newer target that's been identified using a ZTAM survey containing the largest EM, so electromagnetic anomaly, on the property. And it's also sitting in a geological environment that is similar to Kansanshi. Let's call it Kansanshi. So there's plenty to talk about between the three targets and two rather interesting partnerships here, which means that it'd be a good idea for me to shut up already and let you do the talking here, Adrian. And normally this show is called the CEO BBQ, but today it's marketing barbecue, something along those lines. But nonetheless, this is a barbecue special question here for you. Who are you, and why should I trust you with my money?
So I'm Adrian O'Brien, Director of Marketing for Midnight Sun. Been with the company for about just shy of 24 months. I've been in the industry for 28 years. Worked everything from investor relations to CEO. I spent most of my career as a CEO. Used to be a director of the PDAC, which is kind of the overseeing body of mining in Canada, and spent the last 5 or 6 years of my career with a group called Oxygen Capital. Oxygen had a string of very successful projects, probably most notably Frontier Gold, which sold to Newmont for $2.3 billion. That was the Long Canyon Gold Deposit in Nevada. But our group had a number of successes, and we did a lot of work together. But I decided to go on to something different about 2 years ago. And I was shown this particular project, which is Midnight Sun, and was absolutely blown away. Not only am I a huge copper buff, I think copper is definitely one of the metals that people should be most focused on right now. I'm a huge believer in what's coming as far as the copper deficit, but there are very few places in the world where you can find copper deposits that have a chance to be globally impactful. And what I saw when I reviewed this project was exactly that. This was a super unique project in the right jurisdiction, and there was all kinds of opportunity to take the steps to quickly build critical mass and take this project to the forefront. And that's exactly what we've done. So in the last 12 months, we've put together 2 strategic deals, as you mentioned, one with Cobalt Metals, one with First Quantum, and that creates what I like to call a unicorn in the mining sector. What we've developed today is one of the few companies you'll probably ever see that has managed to put this together, and that is a very large-scale exploration upside in terms of big projects, big targets for these strata-bound copper deposits. Simultaneously, a plan that should put us in production very quickly on oxide copper that, as you described perfectly, will be delivered to First Quantum's Kansanshi mine for their SXEW circuit, and it'll basically turn into a feedstock source for them. Very unique situation. We're very fortunate based on our proximity, but none of this is by accident. We've been working on this project for 12 years. It's not new. We've done a ton of work. We have bona fide discoveries on every corner of the property. So all 4 targets are bona fide drilled discoveries, with exception of Crunch, which is a VTEM target, as you mentioned. However, these need critical scale, they need to be developed, and they need systematic drilling to really define their extents. And that is what has not been done to date, but is now going to happen thanks to these 2 strategic deals. So we're fully funded, we're ready to roll, and if we're successful, we'll see cash flow inside of 12 months. So this is a super unique position, great project, and that's what brought me to Midnight Sun and led me to joining the team 2 years ago, if you will.
Cash flow before the end of 2025. Am I getting that correctly?
That is the goal. You got it.
We'll talk about all these things and how exactly you want to get there here, Adrian, for sure. But just there's a couple of smell test questions, if you will, that I do before actually going into the barbecue. Management ownership is noted at 10%. Do you know what the breakdown of that ownership is and who owns how much?
You know what? I can tell you a couple of different shareholders. One would be Brett Richards, one of our directors, sits around 8 million shares. There is basically dispersed amongst our board is about 12% ownership. So, divided pretty equally amongst the board. But when you look at Brett's actually one of our biggest shareholders, sitting at around 8 million personal ownership. So really significant ownership. And, that group has stuck with this deal all the way along. It's been the same management all the way along, and they've done a hell of a job. So.
Was the majority of that position built in the open market and during financings, or were there founders' shares involved?
No, there's no founder shares involved with any of the members of this company. So this company was actually, it was originally a CPC years and years ago. There was a company called Attack that was very active in the Yukon, and they had a lot of gold assets. They created a spin-out company called Midnight Sun Mining, which is exactly the company we are today. Only without the Yukon assets, but stuck with the Yukon name. So that is why we're called Midnight Sun. It's actually a reference to the Yukon, not to Zambia. But we found this Zambian asset about 12 years ago, managed to bring it in, and this became a Zambian-focused copper company, and the asset you see today. So the shares that are owned at that 12% ownership for directors and management were bought in financings and open market. They built their position the old-fashioned way, and that's where they sit today.
Do you know if any of the insiders, I assume the answer is no, given what you just told me, but do any of them own any royalties on the project personally?
No, there's no royalties on this project. So the entire, all 4 targets, all 3 licenses are royalty-free.
The entire package is royalty-free?
Correct.
We'll get to that, because I do want to ask if that's a possibility for future financings if some of these things don't happen the way you want them to.
Sure.
But that about concludes my smell test, if you will, again, before we get into the actual barbecue. And I gave that company overview at the beginning, but thinking about it again, and just today looking through this, I spent a couple of hours going through the official documents as well as the marketing documents, the presentation and whatnot. I'm not sure I understand what exactly is the goal here, because you're exploring the cobalt, they're earning into 75% of part of the project, and then First Quantum at the same time. I know First Quantum needs feedstock, or they'll come into issues with their asset essentially. But that sounds more like it sounds like more of a means to an end rather than an end itself. So what really is Midnight Sun? What are you guys trying to achieve here?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. I actually think the strategy is pretty straightforward. When I joined the group 24 months ago, we were in the midst of figuring out an attack plan to developing these targets. These targets are big. It's very hard to kind of get your head around the scale of this property. It's 506 square kilometers. So each of those target areas is roughly a quarter of that, let's call it, give or take. These are very, very large targets. They require a lot of drilling. They're relatively expensive. Let's call it somewhere between 15 and 20 million to systematically explore them, to carry out enough drilling to really define the extents of any given system. So how do you do that? How do you do that as a small junior? Do you go out and raise $80 million and do that development work on your own? Maybe. Some groups might do that. But we've been developing these at a time when copper was not a hot topic. Copper prices were low. Markets were extremely difficult. And so they've slowly done the requisite amount of work, not just to keep the projects in good standing, but to develop the targets to a point where they're ready to define the systematic extents. So then you have to look at how do we develop a strategy to do that? And our take on it was pretty simple. Let's bring in a strategic. Let's bring in a group that understands what we want to do and understands that we want to develop at least one part of this, one of these targets, but we don't want to give up the farm. We don't want to give up all of the targets. We don't want to bring in a group that's going to come in and do an earn in on the entire property, because that leaves no blue sky for our shareholders. We have 4 targets. Each of those targets could host a billion-ton deposit. And those are Dumbwa, as you mentioned, Me2, Crunch, and Kaziba. So looking at those targets, in our view, the best strategy to get those developed was to bring in a partner on at least one of them and allow that to create lots of excitement, hopefully create success. In the case of Dumbwa, we have a very, very good chance of defining one of these deposits that we're looking for. And we felt that that was the best way forward. It would create lots of excitement, lots of noise, and hopefully would create a re-rate for our shareholders. Simultaneously, as we've gone out and worked on our property, we've carried out geochem, we've carried out drilling, we've carried out different types of geophysical surveys. We've encountered oxide copper mineralization at surface on a number of different parts of our property, including Dumbwa. But we're leaving that to the side because, of course, we're working with cobalt on that target. So looking at Kaziba, looking at Me2, and looking at Crunch, take that out of the equation as well. Let's focus on Kaziba and Me2. You have an area where you have large concentrations of oxide copper that is at surface with 0 strip. We knew that there was some potential there, but we also never looked at that as a standalone situation. You're not going to define 50 or 100 million tons of oxide copper and go out and build a standalone mine to handle that oxide copper. It makes no sense. But the situation is extremely unique in that we are less than 10 kilometers away from Kansanshi. So that's, of course, First Quantum's flagship. And First Quantum has, as you described, an SXEW circuit on site, but they also have one of the most efficient copper smelters on the planet. And that smelter produces about 1.3 million tons of sulfuric acid a year. So that sulfuric acid has to be dealt with in situ. This is an area where there's no local market. You can't ship that sulfuric acid across country boundaries or take it to port, take it to the coast to ship it out. It's not viable. So you have to deal with it in situ. And First Quantum's been doing that for 10, 12, 15 years, maybe even 20 years at this point. And basically, they heap leach copper oxides to neutralize their sulfuric acid and get rid of it. And it works beautifully. But you mentioned electrowinning. What happens is they liberate the copper, and that copper is electrowin. It's turned into a plate that they can sell at market, and they make between 250 and 400 million a year. It's a hell of a byproduct. It's worked very, very well for them for a couple of decades. However, they've depleted the supply of oxide copper at Kansanshi, and they need another supply in order to satisfy that. And we're sitting on that material. So when you look at our overall strategy, we're going to develop Dumbwa, and we want to develop the other 3 targets on our own without a partner. In order to do that, we need cash. Well, if we needed $80 million, that's highly dilutive. But if we can do something with our oxides, that creates cash flow. That may create enough cash flow to take care of all of our targets and do all of our work going forward. And so the strategy was to get that moving. We knew there was an opportunity for that, but what changed was we didn't realize quite how close to the need for a new supply First Quantum was. And as it turned out, they had run out of oxides. They were in dire need of a new supply. We're the only supply regionally or anywhere close to the mine. And actually, there is no other option in the really general area at all. So we ended up in a position where they need oxide copper. We need cash flow, and we're going to work together to unlock that.
Well, if you're sitting on top of that material, as you just said, and they know it, why wouldn't First Quantum just buy you at this point if the risk reward is good enough?
I think as we go forward, the first goal for both of us is to define those targets and figure out how big they are. Figure out what that looks like. Do we have enough material for a year? Do we have enough material for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? We think it's going to be between 5 and 10 years between Kaziba and Me2. But we have to get there. We have to do the drilling, and the drilling is quick. The drilling is inexpensive. So let's get to that point and then let First Quantum answer that question and figure out how to move forward. And at this point, we're looking at a cooperative agreement that extends to a mining arrangement where they can mine that. We'll retain a minority percentage. But the terms of that have to be defined. that has to be put in place. And first things first, we need to drill off these resources and see just how big they are.
What's your timeline for coming to market with an agreement or with a new resource? You said cash flow within 12 months. So yeah, what's the timeline on those pre-cash flow steps?
So as it sits today, moving forward on the exploration side, the exploration program itself, when we were initially looking at it, we had our own plan in place. We were thinking, a 6-month program, 150 holes, 50-meter depth, 50-meter spacing, probably about $1 million cost. As First Quantum stepped on board, they reassessed our plan. They took their own engineering team and developed a plan with us, and that looks much different. Now we're looking at something that's 60 days or less, capital cost of around $500,000. Total drilling is about 3,000 meters, give or take, and a combination of ionic leach sampling, RC and air core drilling, and an IP survey over 2 targets. And so basically that will get them to the point where they can define a resource and the continuity of grade that they need to be able to take that material and get it to Kansanshi. And keeping in mind, like, this is material, it's a mobilized oxide blanket. So this is material that sits at surface with virtually no strip. So it can be excavator mined, taken straight to Kansanshi and put through their SXEW circuit right away. So it's a pretty unique situation.
I know they're involved in the technical process and they're helping you operationally, essentially, with brain power. Who dictates the tempo of shareholder communications here, though? Because it kind of feels like it's been rather slow since you figured out that you want to do that. So is them slowing it down, and how can you manage that?
So nothing slow about it. In order to do this properly, we needed engineering and geological support. The fellow that's running the program is Kevin Bonnell. It's our chief operating officer, former Barrick geologist. He's a fellow that actually unraveled Lumwana for Barrick and set them forth on this new feasibility study that they're going to be doing on one of his discoveries. He's very, very good at this. This is his wheelhouse. These are the types of projects he's worked on throughout his entire career in sub-Saharan Africa. Kevin is driving the program. We're driving the program. This is a cooperative exploration plan, but it's a Midnight Sun program. So, communications wise, it's going to come from us. Drill results are going to come from us. But we're both in a position where we want this developed as quickly as possible. This cash flow puts Midnight Sun in a position where we would be fully funded. So we want to get to that. And of course, First Quantum needs this material yesterday. So we want to get this material in their hands as quickly as we can, but we need to do it right. We want to make sure we're not wasting money. We want to make sure we're not wasting time. And we want to get them the right geological information that will allow them to determine that production timing, speed, engineering plan. And their goal is to get material flowing to Kansanshi inside of the next 12 months. So the time frame to getting to where we are today and having an exploration program underway was dictated by their engineering team, by our geological team, and the two working together to make sure they really put a plan together that gets us to where we want to be the right way and the right time frame and in budget. Obviously, capital cost at this point is pretty incredible to get to a production situation with zero capex, in a resource of some type in a time period like 60 days is pretty incredible. So.
Well, but then again, I still don't understand how it's possible that you've not been taken out if the risk reward of what you're telling me is essentially as easy as you make it sound. Because I mean, you're an $80 million market cap. There's no big blocks of ownership. 10% is management, about 16% or so are institutions, but they're kind of segmented, if you will. And so it doesn't seem like something that's too hard to be taken out at this point. Even if it's double the money, 160 million, it still dwarfs in comparison to the cash flow that you were expecting. So what's that disconnect? Like, why hasn't that happened yet?
Well, there's not really a position for anybody to take us out at this point. There's agreements in place. First Quantum's working with us, without diving into anything that's under NDAs or CAs or anything like that. There are agreements in place that prevent anything from happening. So First Quantum is working with us through to the point that we have a resource. There's no opportunity there for anything to happen ahead of time. We're working forward to getting to that plan, getting that plan in place. As far as somebody else coming in, You'd have to look at the regional players. I mean, it doesn't make sense for another player to come in and take a swing at us for the oxide resource. It makes sense probably for First Quantum. But when you look at the bigger targets, obviously the end game for Midnight Sun is M&A. That's why we're here. That's what we're doing. We're not a mining company. We're not a producer. So the entire goal here is to build a package that puts us in the best position for the greatest possible return on both of the re-rates I mentioned. And those two re-rates are very simple. One around the big stratabound targets, of which there's 4, Dumbwa being number 1, and then the secondary re-rate around this oxide target. But we have to get to at least the point that we've drilled that off, proven that it's real, and shown the size and scale of it to put ourselves in a position. And I think that's where things are going to start to get really interesting.
You also mentioned that the land package is rather large, against over 500 square kilometers, as far as I understand. So that is large. Well, there's not many maps really showing what's happening on the website, at least. I know there was one in your recent news release, not as detailed as I would like it to be. Do you have a plan of updating the maps or the presentation in the meantime? And again, this is all within the realm of who's really pulling the threads here, who's really dictating the tempo of communication with shareholders, and who's really telling you how much you can tell them. So that's why I'm bringing that up.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, we'll be updating maps as we go. At this point, the geological plan that's underway for Kaziba, right? So that's where we're working now. The geological plan for Kaziba is really straightforward. There's a 300-meter footprint. We haven't put maps out because at this point, there's not a lot of geological data to share beyond 31 existent drill holes. But as we go forward, we can start to share more geological data, more geological information, particularly pertaining to the results as they start to flow when we get to that phase of the program. But this is all going to happen very quickly. This is something that we see a timeline of, exploration through to resource within a couple of months. So it's very, very fast, and we'll update that information as it comes. But again, the flow is being dictated by Midnight Sun, but because First Quantum is working with us and providing geological and engineering support, of course, they're going to be steering how we develop this program and how we define the material that they need to make sure that it fulfills their geological needs in order to get an engineering plan underway.
Exploration through the resource, through to production within a year, it is aggressive on almost any measure operationally and everything, really. I mean, partner wise, but also permits wise and government wise and community wise. So let's talk about that here. I know there was an issue with the permits toward the end of the summer. What's the state now? What exactly happened, and how are they looking for the future?
Oh, the permit situation was really not much of a situation at all. So Kaziba is covered. There's 3 licenses that cover our property. One of those licenses covers Kaziba. Kaziba is, of course, the project we're working on right now. And there was a situation where on the Zambian mining cadastre portal, that license showed as being rejected, and there was another claim that laid over top of it. And as it turns out, it was a clerical. So the Zambian government was fantastic. We worked with the ministry. They immediately jumped into action. Our team jumped into action as soon as that was discovered, and they fixed the issue very, very quickly. So within about 10 days, that was fixed. The website was fixed, reflecting that, but they still had to go through the process of doing their site visit. That's a standard process. Every time you renew one of these licenses, that happens. And so, to understand properly, every license in Zambia has to be renewed on a particular basis. I think it's 5 years and then 3 years and 3 years. And this license was renewed in December. Nothing abnormal happened through that process. Everything was moving smoothly. But when this was discovered, everybody leapt into action to make sure that it was rectified, and it was rectified in 10 days. So the ministry, the registrar, everybody in Zambia was super helpful. They dealt with it quickly, and these things do happen from time to time. And it was a clerical issue. So it's been resolved, and now we're moving forward, and they've completed their site visit for their verification report, and now they're in the process of writing the report. So we're at the tail end of that, and in the meantime, moving forward on our exploration plans.
What do you have to get a sign off on in order to be cash flowing? So everything. I mean, I don't know how many there are, or what specific wildlife or whatever else it might be. What do you have to? What's the paperwork?
There's not really much in that way. There are mining permits. So right now we have what are called exploration licenses. They're a 9-year license. You need to put a mining permit in place and have that taken care of and move those towards a 25-year mining license. But that will fall into First Quantum's hands. So the way that we've set up this plan, we're running the exploration. We're getting into defining, a resource or a mineable footprint of oxides or whatever it is that we can really define as we go through this process of drilling and leach sampling and everything else. But permitting, engineering, mine planning, pit planning, processing, trucking, that'll fall to First Quantum. They're miners, we're not. We're explorers. We're happy to do that work and get this thing to the point that it can be developed. But that process will go to them. And then keeping in mind, First Quantum is the largest taxpayer in Zambia. So if First Quantum needs a permit to keep their operation running and keep the taxes flowing, I don't think they're going to run into big hurdles with that. So we're going to leave that process to them. It's what they do best, and it's best left to them.
What about, because this is the mining permit, and so how you're dealing with government here, as far as I understand it. But what about community? I mean, historically, open pit copper mining in Zambia has seen its fair share of community tensions. How's the situation right now for you on your package, and what are you dealing with?
There's no issues at all. I mean, when you look at Zambia, in terms of issues, there really has been very, very few. They're extremely mining friendly. The jurisdiction itself, on a country basis, is very mining friendly. You have a president that's super pro mining. There's 5 chiefdoms there. They're supportive of the projects moving forward. So from that perspective, we don't expect any issues at all. And when you're looking at this region, you have Lumwana. Lumwana is 1 billion tons at 0.55 that's going into a second feasibility study now on what they're referring to as a super pit. That's a big project that's going to be developed. They're not expecting hurdles. You have Sentinel in operation. That's 0.51%. It's 1 billion tons operating to the west. And then, of course, you have Kansanshi less than 10 kilometers away from us. It's a 1 billion ton deposit at 0.66. It's in production and they're operating. They just opened up a new sulfide lens. They're continuing to open pit mine. There's not going to be issues on a brand new project when you're dealing with projects that are already operating in the general vicinity, that are large scale, that are growing, that are developing, and that have decades and decades of production ahead.
What about water? I know water can be a cause of permitting delays, but also a cause of community issues. How's the water situation in your part of Zambia?
So again, I mean, Zambia is very vegetation rich. It's an area that doesn't have known water issues or severe water issues. I mean, this is a pretty smooth running place as far as that goes. So we don't expect any issues. But the big thing for Midnight Sun that you have to keep in mind, we're talking about things that pertain to mining operations. We're not a mining company. We don't plan to be a mining company. We don't plan to put this into production. We plan to develop this to a point where a mining company can, and that mining company is going to have to tackle those issues. But are those issues that anybody expects to run into that are severe? No. Are they issues that would be a hurdle for building a mine? No. Are there mines being run in the area and being developed in the area? Absolutely. So from that perspective, we don't expect any big issues, but they're not things that we're putting a tremendous amount of time into right now, because our goal is really simple, and that's defining deposits, proving critical mass, proving critical scale, and developing something that can move towards production for the right owner and for the right operator. And that's really the key for us.
Yes, but essentially to get the cash flow out of that operation, which is how you hope to profit from this, as far as I understand it, there has to be a mining operation that's turning.
Well, your mining operation, when you're looking at oxides, okay, imagine material sitting at surface, right? So it's basically rubble, it's rock, it's gravel, it's material that's sitting at surface with nothing over top of it, that can be scooped up with an excavator, put into a dump truck, taken to a haul road that's less than a kilometer away, driven straight to the mine and put through their SXEW plant. So it's a mining operation, but it's really it's an earth moving operation that requires very, very little work and very little planning in terms of the typical complications of any kind of a mine. So it's very, very simplistic. And when you're looking at that, you're not really attacking most of those things. We're not building a mine. We're moving material from our property to an existing mine and running it through their mill, through their operations. We're not dealing with most of those issues that you're describing.
What about labor in that case? You're mentioning there's multiple mines in the region. Is there a lot of competition for labor? Is there enough skilled people?
There's enough skilled people. So if you look at Solwezi, right? Solwezi is the town that we're located right close to. 10 years ago, it was 1,000 people. Today, it's 75,000 people. They almost entirely work in the mines. So this is a mining-centric city. It's a place that the people there that are working in the mines are proud. They're proud to work for First Quantum. They're proud to work for Barrick. And it's totally mining-centric. But I mean, you have geoscientists, you have mine workers, you have engineers, you have geologists, all living and working in that town. So you've got a huge talent pool to draw from. And employment-wise, it's there. But again, keeping in mind, this is a very small operation in terms of the actual footprint and actual thing. So if you're doing, an oxide mining situation at Kaziba, it's First Quantum's people that are going to be running it. It's First Quantum's team that's going to be mining it. All we're doing is going in, drilling it off, and showing them where it is, giving them an outline, and then handing them the keys. Here you go. You can mine it.
How much money do you have to spend between now and cash flow, to put it that way? I mean, you have to keep the lights on, so it's your burn rate. But what else? How much money are you budgeting?
So we get 100,000 a year from our cobalt deal, right? So that covers all our GA in Zambia. Our overhead here is significantly lower. I'd call it 50 grand a month, give or take. 50 grand, 60 grand a month. When you're looking at what we need right now, like we have 10 million in the bank today. So when we're looking at our burn rate now, obviously we have overhead, but in terms of the work program, the only cost to us is the oxide drilling that we're doing, and the budget for that's $500,000. So that's to get us to cash flow at Kaziba if we're successful. Then we're going to go to Me2 and start working at Me2, doing the exact same thing with the exact same plan. That project will be significantly bigger. We're expecting it to take around a year, but with a budget of probably $1 million to $1.5 million, give or take. But it's a little bit different from a mineralization perspective. It's a bit different in that it's not a mobilized blanket. It's actually oxides that are still tied to the sulfide source. So we're going to want to do a bit of work there to start to work on those targets at depth as well. So it's a bit bigger thing. It's a bit more comprehensive. But combined total between the two of $1 million to $1.5 million, give or take, is about the overall expense for us outside of our typical monthly overhead.
Well, you say your typical monthly overhead is about 50. Based on the financials that I read at the beginning, though, the reported 6 months came up to about 140, and that's if you're not counting share-based compensation. How come? What's the discrepancy? What have you cut off?
You know what? You'd have to talk to our CFO. I haven't torn the financials apart to know what all the different breakdowns of that are. But I would say if you look at our average monthly overhead, 50 to 60, give or take.
Okay. Essentially, though, you're not going to have to raise capital, ideally, forward-looking statements.
We're fully funded.
Planned.
We're fully funded. Like that's the thing to look at. You're looking at something here where we're fully funded through to production. If we're successful on this plan with First Quantum, the likelihood of success is extremely high. So we feel that the 10 million that we've raised in May of this year is going to carry us all the way through to cash flow, and that the cash flow will then fund us through development of the other three targets, Kaziba, Me2, and Crunch, in terms of those stratabound targets that underlie the bigger oxide material at surface.
And that's best case scenario, and then that's fine. I understand that's what you have to say. Nobody wants to think about the downside. But what if the deal falls through, that doesn't work, doesn't happen like you expected? What's the backup plan?
The backup plan is pretty straightforward. What is the downside? Okay, so let's look at the downside to Midnight Sun in terms of our success at Kaziba. If we aren't successful at Kaziba, what's the likelihood of not being successful at Kaziba? Pretty low. We've got 31 drill holes right now that give us a significant starting point and a high grade 1.3% average of that copper footprint today, 300 meters wide by 200 meters north to south, let's call it. If we're not successful, we go to Me2. If we're not successful at Me2, let's say none of the oxides work out. We have a $15.5 million deal with Cobalt underway to develop Dumbwa. Dumbwa is a huge prize. if Dumbwa is successful, you have a 20-kilometer long soil anomaly at 0.73% copper. Okay, it's ore grade copper in soil. It's the highest grade and largest copper soil anomaly in Zambian history. Pretty impressive. And when you're looking at that, you have huge upside based on that strata-bound target, and we have 3 more of those. Could we bring someone else in to develop them? Sure. Could we finance them independently? Absolutely. Do we have confidence that we could do that? Absolutely. So when you're looking at the oxide plan, I think it's important to understand that it's become a critical part of our strategy, but it's not the end all be all. This is icing on the cake, and it's pretty tremendous icing. But at the end of the day, there's lots of different ways that we can move this ahead, and there's lots of interest in doing that. But it's a twofold attack plan, both of which have huge upside and the potential for a big re-rate on their own. So there's lots of different ways we can move it forward. It doesn't put us in a tough position. Obviously what we want to see is success on both fronts. And do we think we're going to get there? We do.
Yeah. Yes. Well, those are that's the forward-looking statements that I always mentioned at the beginning, but it's good to have a plan. That's why I'm asking about what the backup plan is there. So I appreciate the answer. You're mentioning cobalt. I want to talk about cobalt before our time is up today. What are they exactly looking for? What are the contingencies upon which your partnership depends? What's the timeline? Tell me everything.
So cobalt, of course, they have about 60 projects worldwide, right? They're working predominantly on critical metals related projects, but their real focus right now, a big focus is Zambia. They're looking at copper, they're looking at cobalt. Copper is the big focus here between our project, Dumbwa, and something called Mingomba that they're working on, which is a larger, better known deposit that's been around for a while. Their plan is really straightforward. They're doing 15.5 million in exploration. It's almost entirely drilling. And so they're setting forth their plan. They're looking at their attack, their approach. It's being led by David Broughton, who's probably the top geologist, along with Kevin Bonnell, for stratabound copper in Zambia. Kevin, of course, has a lot of deposits, a lot of discoveries under his belt. David is credited with Kamoa-Kakula. Kamoa-Kakula is owned by Ivanhoe, north of us in the DRC. That's 1.4 billion tons at 3%. It's a pretty incredible deposit. It's a pretty incredible project, and David's the one that unraveled that. He also led the pre-feasibility team at Kansanshi, right next door to us. So David's been around the project for a long time. He actually came to us 8 years ago and told us how important it was. So look, you guys have an incredible target. Do whatever it takes. Don't ever lose this thing. Fast forward 8 years. He joins Cobalt. He leaves Ivanhoe. He joins Cobalt and immediately recommends that they do a deal with us to work on this project. So pretty incredible to have somebody of that caliber running this thing. But he's defining the plan. He's set it forth, and hopefully they'll get moving on this pretty quickly. But 4.5-year exploration program to define what they hope is a 1 billion-ton deposit.
Well, what are they telling you about that timeline, though? I mean, hopefully they move pretty quickly. It is not as specific as I typically like it. So what do you think?
You know what? It's in their hands. They're the operator, right? So we can't steer that. That's up to Cobalt. Cobalt has to come up with a plan. Cobalt has to come up with their strategy and their timing. But the reality is they're going to be aggressive. We know what they're going for. They're going to be aggressive. What we're butting up against now is the rainy season. So the rainy season typically starts around American Thanksgiving. So let's call it the middle of November. And it wouldn't make sense to mobilize and demobilize drill rigs for a very, very short amount of work. So we're not sure if they'll go in this year or if they'll go in early 2025 when rainy season ends. It would probably make most sense to do that. But again, it's in their hands. It's up to them. And they're coming up with a plan that will get them in the field and aggressively drilling on Dumbwa very quickly. And when you look at this from an overall perspective, 15.5 million in exploration is not a lot of work. I mean, it's enough. It's not arbitrary, though. It gets us 40 to 50,000 meters of drilling. That's what it takes to get to critical mass on one of these deposits. If you look at the other deposits in the belt, that's been kind of the magic number as far as drilling goes. So that's what gave us this 15.5 million number that we've been working with on the cobalt front, is really getting us a program large enough to get that critical mass, get us enough drilling to see if this is or isn't, a 1 billion-ton deposit. So they're going to go in and they're going to systematically drill this thing, drill this target, and give us, for the first time, a view to how big Dumbwa actually is.
It's an all or nothing deal, though, I suppose. I mean, they either spend the 15.5 to get to 75%,
Correct.
or they get nothing.
Yeah, there's no partial earn-in.
Well, again, backup plan though. What happens if they don't start drilling? Something happens. Funny, I don't know. Silicon Valley stuff. Imagine whatever you want. What happens then? What would you get? Because you like Dumbwa, they like it. There's potential. Do you go out there looking for a new partner? Do you try to raise money, drill it yourself? What would happen in that case?
I think the geological thesis behind Dumbwa is well enough known right now. Again, we have Kevin Bonnell. So, let me give you a little slight digression in terms of looking at Kevin and looking at the team. Kevin joined us, let's call it 3 months ago. Prior to that, 4 years ago, he was parachuted in by Barrick to Lumwana to unravel something that they'd been trying to figure out for 15 years. In 24 months, he gave them a project that now qualifies for this brand new feasibility study, multi-decades of reserves, and Lumwana is going to become an incredible story. But it moved it from a tier 2 asset to a tier 1 asset. Kevin did that in 24 months. He joined Midnight Sun because he believes that Dumbwa has the same or better potential than Lumwana. So when you're looking at what he believes in, and of course David Broughton believes in, this is a target that everybody wants to get at. We had no shortage of interest from other groups to fund it and to work with us on it. Kobold was the one that we went with because they were the right group for us. They had the right geological team, geological expertise, the right approach. But could we do it on our own? Probably. Do we have the expertise around us? Yes. Could we fund it? No question. So what we think and what we want to do is work with Kobold. They're amazing. Is there a contingency plan? At this point, we don't need one. But the project has validity going forward, no matter who's funding it, no matter who we're working with. But we're happy with our partner. They're a great partner. They're going to do a killer job, and we're going to see them move this thing forward. So, I think we're not so focused on contingency plans right now, but our belief in the asset, our belief in the target is steadfast. And, come hell or high water, we're going to move this thing forward, but we're doing it with Kobold.
Has it been looked at historically, though? I know the Solwezi Dome has been, I don't know which parts exactly have been, but why did nobody go forward with it at the time? Like these people that you're saying that want that land package, why don't they have it right now?
So this land package was originally owned by First Quantum. So I'm not sure if you knew that, but it was originally owned by First Quantum. So First Quantum, if you wind the clock back 20 years, they own 15 to 20 licenses in this region. And the Zambian government introduced something, we refer to it as a use it or lose it rule, but basically the Zambian government introduced a new rule where they were trying to say, look, if you're developing, they were developing Kansanshi, right? So you're moving Kansanshi forward, that's five licenses, I think, 6 licenses maybe. And they've got all these other licenses that are basically sitting there stagnant. Nobody's doing any work. They're not generating anything. It's sitting there. It's property that they've done work on. They've got geological data, worthwhile exploration ground, but they're not active. And the government said, look, if you're not active, let's let other people be active, and made them relinquish a number of their licenses. And that is the rule. That's why in Zambia, every time you renew your license, you have to shed a little bit of the property and make it a bit smaller. It allows other people to come in, pick up ground that you're not working on, and do work. So it just keeps the cycle going all the time. And that property was picked up by a private individual, and we optioned it from them. So there is historic work. There's historic interest. First Quantum had the property. People have done work. We had a lot of interest and a lot of other parties that came to the table and continue to have conversations with us around that. And there's no question there's interest. But we rely on that historical data for what we're doing. And it's beneficial that there's been other groups there and that there's been other interest in this property over the history of it. But we're the guys that hold it at this point, and we've got a big land package and we get to move it forward.
I'm just trying to think of what potential issues there might have been, or what, because you never know. I mean, I understand the history there and how they've dropped it, and so the big happenings during history. You don't really know what was happening throughout everyday life on the project, essentially. What about metallurgy? We didn't talk too much about metallurgy. Could there be any metallurgical challenges if there are any mixed mineralization types, and where I'm coming from with this is, and maybe that's a question for another time, but where I'm coming from with this is thinking about the stratiform thesis versus this being a more complex multi-stage hydrothermal system, potentially causing metallurgical challenges. So are you doing any met test? Do you know anything about the metallurgy?
So in terms of the metallurgy, in terms of the met testing, that falls to First Quantum. So one of the big things with this cooperative exploration plan is for First Quantum to be able to handle the met testing and do all of the work on assays and met testing on site. So it's being done at Kansanshi. They have an ALS lab on site. So it's a fully certified ALS lab, and they'll be carrying that stuff out. We've done enough work there. We feel confident that the material will hold up. We do know, looking at Kansanshi, of course, if you look at the production profile from their SXEW plant, you can see their recoveries is very good. And we expect to have high recoveries, but we're going to leave it to them to get that mat testing done and make sure that it falls in line with what they've seen in the past. But keeping in mind, the mineralization at Kansanshi, or at Kaziba, sorry, is significantly higher grade than what they've historically mined and operated with at Kansanshi at their SXEW circuit. So that's going to be beneficial as well.
What about oh, but this is a lab on site. Is it, because you say it's fully certified? How trustworthy is it essentially?
It's ALS, the biggest lab company in the world. So it's First Quantum. Keep in mind, this is First Quantum needs these numbers, and they need to know this is going to work before they deliver stuff to their site. They're relying on their met testing and their assaying. That's as good as it needs to get for anybody. There's no need to be concerned about it beyond that. If it works for them, it works for their circuit, it's going to carry them forward on their plan.
What about core loss? I know you've had that in the past, if I'm not mistaken. To what extent has or is or could that be slowing you down in any way or causing any issues?
No expected slowdowns or issues in any respect pertaining to that. Again, the plan's pretty simple. You've got, 3,000 meters of drilling, RC and AC. They're going to drill kind of a nice grid across this entire thing, and they're going to do ionic leach sampling. The sampling is going to give them grade consistency at surface, and they're going to get continuity that way. They're going to be able to see with a really clear view across that 300-meter footprint just how good quality that is, if it holds up, if the grade is there, if there's good continuity. And then we're going to use the IP to look at the deeper targets and look at a secondary target on the property. So it's a solid plan, but it's a plan driven by First Quantum. Like, this is their approach. This is what they need to get this to where they're going to go. But keep in mind, they're not doing a feasibility study or extended pre-feasibility studies or PEAs or anything. This is about getting material that they can feel confident in and know that it can go to site and go through their SXEW circuit. And that's exactly what they're doing.
We're coming up on time here, so I don't want to spend too much time going into these specifics. What about, just maybe one last thing, what about political risk in Zambia, close to Congo, whatever's happening in the Congo? Does that influence you in any way? Just talk to me in general about the political risk over there.
Yeah, no, I mean, political risk in Zambia is great. So let's use a couple of examples. Ivanhoe just announced a deal with the Zambian government. So Ivanhoe is basically now going to be receiving geological data, geological information, targets from the Zambian government to give them new areas for exploration, and they're going to go and spend money in Zambia. They wouldn't be doing that if the geological or the risk from a jurisdictional perspective was difficult. Zambia has a great mining industry underway. They have 75% of their export earnings are copper. This is a mining-centric place run by a mining-centric government that's pro-mining and wants projects to be developed and built. So if you look at the current president's plans, they're trying to increase production. They're trying to increase output. They're trying to climb higher in the global rankings as a copper producing district. This is a place where if you can find a project, you can find a deposit, you can find an asset worth developing. If you find it, you can build it. So it's a great spot in that respect.
What else? I'm trying to look through. I made a couple of mental notes when I was looking through your news releases. What else am I forgetting to ask you? What are some of the What are some of the questions other people or fund managers, whoever else, have been asking you recently?
I think the big questions we always get, how much cash do you have on hand? Do you have lasting power? Do you have money? Yeah, we've got 10 million in the bank. So we announced a $3.3 million financing in March. We closed 10.10 or 10.10, $10 million in May. That's significant. Was oversubscribed by a mile. Tons of interest in the financing. They're asking us what the timeline is. We're happy to deliver that timeline. That's what we're working on. For oxides, a matter of months at Kaziba. And then, of course, there's sort of a 12-month timeline to getting that material in production. And those are the things. I mean, you've covered most of the questions that usually come up. And it really falls around, how does this twofold attack plan work? What are we trying to do? But I think hopefully you've got a pretty good handle from what we've talked about today. The reality is, you do have a twofold attack plan, and you have two different re-rates that you're going to be looking at. One is around oxides, one is around these strata-bound targets, and just the first of 4 strata-bound targets we're going to develop. It's a really unique plan, and it's a unique opportunity. You very, very rarely in our business see a company that has exploration upside of this scale and near-term production potential. And the potential for cash flow here is significant. This is not small scale. It's significant. We think that we can put something together that'll help First Quantum at Kansanshi for the next 5 to 10 years. And we're going to work together to make it happen.
Right, moving on, I'm going to Nevada again, but not to gamble. Well, at least not in an actual casino. But I'm going to Nevada mostly for its history and now hopefully its future as a silver state. Luckily for everyone listening, though, I won't be the one doing most of the talking today, as I am joined by Greg Trow, the CEO of Silver One Resources, an exploration company listed as SLVRF in the US on the OTC, as well as SVE on the TSX Ventures Exchange in Canada, where an average of about 180,000 shares trade each day. I see a 52-week high of 40 cents and a 52-week low of 13 cents. There are 269 million shares outstanding, and with today's $78 million market cap, that means SVE is trading at about 29 cents per share. In addition to the 269, I was going to say 169, it's 269 million shares outstanding. There are close to 29 million warrants and 13 million options, leaving the number of fully diluted shares at about 310 million. A couple of famous names on the share registry here. Potentially the biggest one is Eric Sprott. He owns about 15% of this company, as well as a couple of big funds own some stock here as well, while directors and management own about 3% of the company. The last officially filed financial statement on Setter Plus, which shows the numbers as of June 30, 2024, has over $6.8 million in current assets on it, mostly in cash. So specifically at the time, there was $5.8 million in cash, with about $1 million worth of account receivables and prepaid expenses, as well as a small portion of marketable securities. On top of that, those marketable securities were received as a part of a deal the company did a while back, though, and as well as there's some debt for share settlement. Those are smaller amounts, though. Total liability sat at just under $1 million, $930,000 to be specific, almost all of which in the form of reclamation obligations, which of course does not represent an immediate need for any cash outflows. In terms of operating expenses, the 6-month period that ended on June 30 this year costed Silver One just shy of $1 million when you count everything up. But when you take out the non-cash expenses like share-based compensation and appreciations, the cost falls to about $120,000 in average monthly administrative cost for that 6-month period. The largest element of that administrative spend were the various forms of compensation. So if you could count up consulting, director fees, professional fees, salaries and benefits, stuff like that together, that already is about half of the total cost. So that'd be an average of about $60,000 a month. About a fifth, so that 18% to be specific, of the total spend is represented by shareholder communication, so essentially marketing, and about 11% was office and comparables. As to exploration and administration costs, those exploration and evaluation, not administration, those get capitalized. So you find them under Note 7 in the financials. They show almost $2 million spent for that same period. which is an average cost of $312,000 per month, to be specific. The majority of the money, so about $1 million, was spent on Candelaria for the period. That is the flagship asset here, with currency translation being the largest part, which is kind of curious, and hopefully we'll touch upon that later as well. And consulting being the second largest part. So in summary, we've got 120 grand a month going into administration and 312 going into exploration and evaluation related activities, leaving us with what I call an exploration to administration ratio of about 2.6 to 1, meaning about 72% of the money went to exploration and evaluation, and a rough 28% went into administration. As always, though, please understand that this financial statement is nothing more than a snapshot in time. In this case, it is specifically at the end of June of this year, and it simply shows you what the finances look like on that exact date and nothing more. Finances, though, can change. They're a fluid thing, and math could be hard, especially if you're me. So it is imperative that by the time you're watching this, you visit the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date numbers and make sure you're getting the full picture. For Silver One, that full picture is, as I said, focused on Nevada, although there is an Arizona element to it as well. And I'm going to kick it off with Nevada, though, because that is where the company's flagship asset is. Again, the name might come off familiar to most people listening because we're talking about the Candelaria mine, which is, of course, a past-producing silver mine that produced almost 70 million ounces over the years. And apparently, Silver One believes Candy has more to give. The history of the mine goes back to the 50s, and no, not the 1950s, actually the 1850s. So it is extensive, and I won't cover all of it in depth here, of course. But if you're wondering whether this is something new, it's not. And if you're wondering whether there's something left there, you wouldn't be the first one to do so. Silver One also wondered the same thing, and they started looking into the historic work that's been done on the project, and there is a historic resource calculation on it, finding one that's almost 25 years old now, so going back to 2001, I believe, so 2001, and containing 44 million ounces of silver in the M&I category, and that'd be of the NI 43-101 technical disclosure, and almost 35 million ounces of silver is in the inferred category there. Notably, those are not AGEQ numbers, though, so that's not silver equivalent, that's just the silver alone, but there is, of course, a little bit of gold in there, too. The silver grade alone on that resource from 2001 was almost 2 ounces of silver per ton, which for the people using normal metric systems comes to about 60 or so grams of silver per ton. Now, that's what's in the ground, but there already is some ore above ground, which Silver One did a resource on as well in 2020, showing over 45 million ounces of silver and close to 90,000 ounces of gold in the inferred and indicated categories combined in NI 43-101 here. And they're sitting again above ground. They're in the leach pad, although that study was done at $20 silver and $1,500 gold. So potentially, again, it's not in technical documents, but there's potentially more that could be recovered from that. Also, typically low recovery rates that we're talking about here, so below 40%, but maybe something can be done about that as well. Of course, those resources are not why Silver One is going after this asset to begin with. It's the exploration potential that's got them excited, and specifically a depth, which would then be underground mining, but also a long strike expansion potential is here, which would be open pit in that case. And now there's this a new theory, one that's curious, at least for me, saying that there's porphyry exploration potential, which is associated with magnetic and IP anomalies. So we'll talk about hopefully all three of those expansion potentials here later on in the conversation. What else they believe they can improve on is the recovery rate, mainly because preliminary tests have already shown a 30% increase in recovery. So they went from 51% recoveries to 66%. So that's a 15% point increase, which is again an improvement of about a third. Too much, really, that I can say about this project, but I promise to be brief, and I've already not been so. So next up is Phoenix. So that's jumping out of Nevada and well into southeastern Arizona to look at the Phoenix Silver Project, which Silver One bought earlier this year. It's an over 6,000 hectare project, which the company has found some very high-grade silver bits and pieces in, essentially parts of veins, supposedly. And they now want to go and find the veins that have driven that high grade, which is why they just started a 2,500 meter drill program targeting shallow drilling. So that's going to be an average depth of about 60 to 65 meters for a total of 40 holes. And that's happening out of 13 pads. So hopefully an update on this later on as well. And then last, and actually kind of least too, because we're going back to Arizona for the Cherokee project, which is an over 5,000 hectare land position that covers a structurally controlled epithermal precious metal system. But it requires more work. It requires walking the bush, so some more groundwork, as well as some geophysics need to be completed before we have drill targets on that one. And I'm not sure what the permit status is, nor what the long-term plans here are. So again, hopefully a more in-depth update on that later on in the conversation. Now, for this to transition from a rant to an actual conversation, though, I will have to practice the subtle art of shutting up and letting the guests do the actual speaking. So, Greg, let's start you off with a CEO barbecue special here. Who are you, and why should I trust you with my money?
Well, thanks a lot, Antonio. Good introduction, by the way. I don't think I need to say any more, but I will say more. Okay, I have a background in geology. I have 2 degrees in geology, worked for several major companies in my over 35 years of experience working in the geological, mainly exploration field. My last stint as a CEO was with a company called Entrée Gold. Entrée Gold was, shall we say, famous for acquiring a large ground position around the then held Oyu Tolgoi porphyry copper gold project in Mongolia that was held by Ivanhoe Mines. Of course, Ivanhoe Mines got taken out by Rio Tinto in 2012. I was president and CEO from 2002 until 2015, when Rio took over Ivanhoe Mines. They became Entrée's partner on the northern extension of the rich porphyry system called the Hugo Dummett ore body. So I negotiated several deals and brought Rio Tinto in as a major partner. When I left Entrée, retired in 2015, Entrée still owned and still does own a 20% carried interest in some of the richest mineralization at Oyu Tolgoi. So that was my background in the last several years of my life. 2015, I retired. 2016, I got a phone call and went and had an interview with a fellow you might know. His name is Keith Newmeyer, First Majestic Mining. He convinced me to come back as president and CEO of a brand new exploration silver company called Silver One. And I agreed to do that. And I'm currently sitting here as president and CEO still. Now, when we formed the company, we formed it around 3 Mexican exploration projects, but it became apparent probably after several months that they were a little bit too early stage, and I went looking for something more advanced. I targeted the Candelaria past-producing silver mine, which you stated produced about 68 million ounces of silver during its years of operation from the mid-1800s up to the late 1900s. And essentially decided that I would go and approach people I knew at Silver Standard. We executed a deal. We consummated that deal in 2023. It was an all-share deal, except for we had to replace a reclamation bond on one of the big heap leach pads for 2.5 million US dollars. We did that in 2023. We now have 100% interest with no royalties back to Silver Standard. So that's essentially my background and how I got to where I am sitting today.
Thank you for that overview. I appreciate it being in depth. When I ask you who you are and why should I trust you with my money, part of that, or what makes it easier for me to trust people with my money, is when they trust themselves with their own money. In your case, insider ownership at around 30% doesn't look too large to begin with. How come? And how much of that is you, as well as what's your average cost of acquiring those shares?
Yeah, essentially, I came in and I acquired a large block of shares from the shell company that became Silver One. It was called BRS Ventures at the time. So the average cost of those was probably just Probably around 5 cents per share at the time because it wasn't a trading vehicle. It was a halted vehicle. I've acquired other shares through exercise of options, etc. Those were more expensive, anywhere between 15 and 25 cents. And so I acquired most of my position through the initial purchase and through option exercises. I have participated in some private placements, but I haven't participated in the latter private placements. Haven't needed to. They've all been oversubscribed, and I just didn't feel a need to. My current position, I probably have just shy of 2 million shares in the company and probably a couple to 3 million options.
What I'm really trying to understand here, Greg, is how important is this investment to you, and really what your motivation is to make it work. So how big of a position is this for you personally? How much do you really have at risk here?
Well, it's a pretty significant position. I mean, assuming that, of course, we are successful in our endeavors, it could be a multi-million dollar bonus to me, and it could fund a second retirement, shall we say. That's not bad. I mean, I'm not financially strapped, if that's what you mean, but I am committed to this project. I've given now going on 7 years to this project, 6, 7 years to this project. And I usually don't back away. I usually stay committed. I stayed committed to Entree for 12 and a half years. And I think I did a good job at building that company and building the worth of that company. And I think that with Silver One, I've guided it into becoming a more serious company by bringing in assets that could actually proceed to a development stage.
That is something that I do want to talk about, whether that is the goal or not. And we'll definitely get to that point. Just one more thing or a couple more things. Do you or any of the other employees or consultants of the company, any insiders, own any royalties on any of the projects personally?
No.
Sure. That is about my smell test. So that concludes the part of my smell test. Thank you for sitting calmly through it. I've had different experiences too over the years, but
I've been around the bush.
Let's move on to understanding the company, as I said here, better, because
Yes.
again, there's just really so much going on at Candelaria alone right now. There's an open pit resource which you want to grow at depth along strike. There's a leach pad resource on top of that. You think there's a porphyry potential, which I want to talk about. You want to improve the recoveries in the leach pad with the new tech, and then again, you're chasing after an IOCGR's con-related porphyry there, which is again not a small endeavor to begin with. For most company, that would be the entire company. And again, that's all without mentioning the other two projects. So this is Candelaria alone, where you're also dealing with different geologies, mind you, between the different projects. So what's really going on here, Greg? What is the story of Silver One, and what is it that you really want to do here? Become a mining company or create an attractive takeover target?
Well, my goal right now is to advance Silver One. We are striving towards development at Candelaria. As you mentioned, Phoenix Silver and Cherokee, which is in Nevada as well, are really exploration potential. So how far will they go in the development stage is yet to be seen. But we're working on Phoenix Silver right now, not working on Candelaria. As we proceed along towards development and hopefully towards a production decision on Candelaria, then we will see what falls out. I mean, in my previous endeavor with Entree Gold, we had 100% interest in the project, but we were not adverse to giving up 80% of that project when it became apparent that we did not have the financial wherewithal to fully develop that big Hugo Dummett ore body in Mongolia. But we did so for a high price, $35 million plus a 20% carried interest in all mineralization, with the only repayment out of revenues, 90% of production revenues. Now, is that going to happen at Candelaria? Right now, we're heading towards production, well, development, and then hopefully to production. If someone comes along with an offer that is really too good for management to not present to their investors, well, that's not my approach. We will always present to investors if a very good offer is ever made.
What is that? If I come to you and I say I have an offer, what's the thing you're hoping to see in that offer?
Well, there could be a couple of things that can happen. As you know, with junior companies, one might come and say, we really like Candelaria. We want to do a deal just on Candelaria. You keep the other two projects. Well, it would depend on the terms of that deal on Candelaria. Or they may come and say, I want Phoenix Silver, because that also has porphyry potential, which you should really pay attention to as well. Because Silver One, as a junior company, doesn't have the cash flow to be able, or doesn't have the cash in its treasury to be able to develop a huge porphyry system. So we would probably welcome a partner on that portion of the property while we maybe develop the silver. There's multiple avenues we can take. Of course, the alternative flip side is somebody comes and just says, we want to buy your company. Well, it would have to be a pretty good offer because, we've had trading highs in our history of up to $1 a share. We've had trading lows down to a few pennies. And, I would want to protect as many of those investors as possible.
Well, so which one are you pursuing more right now? Like you mentioned,
development to production on Candelaria, exploration on the other two. We're not entertaining any other deals right now at this stage.
Right. What are you prioritizing from those three, those where I want to go? Because the exploration at Phoenix, early stage, kind of an interesting thesis too, but really what you have is these bits and pieces on surface right now, whereas Candelaria, lower risk, like what's happening there. So how do you take that decision?
Well, the decision is, as you said at the beginning, Candelaria is the flagship project. It's the most advanced. It has past production. It's got resources, some of them historic, some of them 43-101, and it's the closest to development. The other two are exploration projects, but we're not going to ignore the exploration side of the other two projects either. So what we're doing is at Candelaria, we are currently doing metallurgical studies. And the reason is because with metallurgical studies, once we get those results, and I can talk about those in details if you want, but once we get those results, we will be able to thoroughly update the historic resource. We've done enough drilling over the last few years to be able to do that. We just need to know how much of that silver we can recover to get a good, valid number. After that, which we hope to have some of that information by the end of this year, after that, we would put out an economic study. It'd be preliminary at first, but beyond that, we would then sit down with the engineers and we would try and say, okay, what is it going to take to get a plan of operation? Because we've already had discussions with both the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, and the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. They've told us in 4 meetings that because Candelaria was never fully reclaimed by Kinross back in 1997, 1998, the permits are still valid. It's still open. They need to be updated to current. They told us if we get them a plan of operation, they would update them in a matter of months, assuming we don't dramatically change the operation. So we get our economic report. We'll sit down with the engineers and we'll try and figure out exactly what we need to do to get to that plan of operation. And we'll move forward accordingly.
What's the water situation there right now? Is that something that they need to sign off on first?
Silver Standard, after Kinross shut down, Silver Standard retained the water rights. We have acquired those water rights with the deal with Silver Standard. We have two wells, each capable of 500 and 700 gallons per minute. And we maintain those licenses. We renew them on an annual basis.
Essentially, you don't have to spend too much money on Candelaria right now before you come out with a PEA. What are you targeting? PEA H1 2025, or when do you think you're going to have it?
We're hoping Q1 2025. That's what we're hoping. But don't hold us to that because sometimes engineers take a little bit longer to get things done than we like. But that's the way it is. Dealing with multiple different ideas here. We're dealing with heap leach pads. We're dealing with fresh near surface open pit mineralization. We're dealing with further down dip mixed oxide sulfide, which could be amenable to deeper underground mining. So there's multiple components to looking at a study. Are we going to strictly re-leach them as Kinross did in the past, or are we going to maybe use these new solutions, which are giving us enhanced recoveries? All depends on economics, and that will come out in the study.
So how much money do you think you can have to spend on it between now and having the PEA?
It'd be under $1 million and several $100,000, and that's budgeted in the current budget from the last financing we did last year.
Yeah. And again, as I read on your last financing, you had close to $6 million in cash, I believe. How much of that is left now in Kitty?
I would say under 4, and we are spending at Phoenix Silver as well. We're doing that drill program. That's about $1.5 million.
Okay, so about $1.5 million on Kindle. Okay, so but you're not gonna have to raise money before you come out with a preliminary economic study to the market.
Yeah, we probably wouldn't do that, and I'm saying probably, I never say never, is if there was some event that took place, silver prices soar to $40 or $50, and our share price does accordingly as well. We may go back to the market and raise money if somebody comes and offers us a good deal on money raising. But otherwise, we would try and get that information out before.
Do you expect you're going to recover some of the money from KCP?
I don't know. And the issue there is we're looking at KCP was bought out by another group, by another company. And that company was Silverton, and Silverton became another company. They have not performed well, but we did recover. Just to put it in context, when we acquired the properties from KCP, which was a subsidiary of First Mining Finance, we essentially did so for shares. That was it. We issued shares. When we sold the assets, which was through KCP, to Silverton, they gave us $1 million in cash and equivalent number of shares to make up the original purchase price. So what we're shy on is a second payment in cash and the sale of the shares. So it's not a major hurdle for Silver One to weight that and see whether this group can perform and do something with their shares.
Timeline or anything that you can tell me about timing here?
No timing. No. We're just waiting and see. It depends on how that group performs, right?
Sure. Well, I was mostly thinking about your expectations, specifically just thinking about, of course, raising money or how you're going to get money. One of those options, as you said, potential partner, strategic investment, or a JV, or whatever else it might be. Would you consider, based on this drill program that's currently ongoing in Arizona at the Phoenix project, would you consider optioning out or selling one of the other projects, albeit Cherokee or Phoenix, to focus on Candelaria?
Sure. As I said, I'm not adverse to doing deals, and if somebody comes with an offer that I think is advantageous to our shareholders, we'll consider it.
But that's not something that, like, you're not hanging up for sale signs on those two projects right now. You're just kind of you're not pressed.
We're not pressed for it. No, we've got 3 good projects. As one of our other investors has said to us, you have 3 great projects, each of which would fit into a separate junior resource company. Which one are you going to focus on? Well, the answer to that right now is we're focusing on 2 of the 3, but most of our focus is devoted really to Candelaria, despite the fact we have a drill turning on Phoenix Silver.
And I want to talk about that drill turning at Phoenix again, as I told you. And I also want to talk about the porphyry potential at Candelaria, because that kind of got me interested. I just kind of like porphyries, as I would suppose you do too. But there was a rather large exchange rate volatility cost, if you want to call it that, on the balance sheet. How come? What's happened?
I'm not sure. Can you be more specific? What you're talking
Sure,
about?
I can pull up the financials to see exactly how you've worded it. But essentially, and it was close to $1 million and it was recorded in the Candelaria, Candelaria portion of the financials. So it's going to be under note 7, I believe.
I don't have it in front of me, so I'd have to look at it and see, just to jog my memory.
Sure. Let's see what you call it. You call it currency translation.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
$720,000 for 6 months.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of currency issues with respect to foreign exchange we raise all our monies in Canadian dollars, and of course we spend most of our monies in American dollars, and that exchange ratio can really fluctuate quite a bit as the Canadian dollar goes from 76, 77 cents down to 72, 73 cents.
Well, sure, but this is a lot of money. I mean, is there something you can do about it? Because this is, again, 6 months. So that's essentially $100,000 a month in currency translation.
Yeah, and a lot of that would have been devoted to the $2.5 million reclamation bond that we would have put up on the Candelaria heap leach pad as well. So that was a big one. That's probably a one-time event.
Oh, well, that's kind of where I was going with this. Like, do you expect this to keep happening? Because this is a big cost.
No, we don't have any more. Well, we don't have any more big expenses like that coming up, but we do have expenses with foreign exchange as it fluctuates back and forth. So there's going to be a differential between the Canadian dollar and the American dollar. Now the American dollar is strong, and that works to our detriment, but there's not a lot we can do unless we want to start raising US dollars.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Not at this rate. I mean, if we improve our share price and we become more active with maybe going to a more senior exchange in the United States, but we don't meet that criteria right now, that would be something down the road to think about.
What is this porphyry thesis of Candelaria? Let's talk about that. I'm an accountant by education, and somehow I don't like talking about numbers. So let's talk about geology instead. Porphyry thesis at Candelaria. Walk me through it.
Okay. I'll talk a little bit about Candelaria, but I have to keep reiterating, probably Phoenix Silver has more porphyry potential than Candelaria. But because Candelaria is very early stage. But what's intriguing geologically about Candelaria is, as you mentioned before, we have IP and magnetic anomalies outside the area of the two big open pits. On one of the old adit dumps, which, and by old, I mean probably the 1800s was when that adit was driven into the hillside and there was a shaft that went down. We don't know how deep. We can't get access to it at this stage. But there's material there that is not silver oxide mineralization. It's copper sulfide mineralization in what looks like a host rock of altered porphyry or skarn. Now, we put 3 drill holes down into that area about 2 or 3 years ago, and one drill hole into the hillside did get skarn mineralization with quite strongly elevated copper, silver, and gold. We put down another vertical deep hole to the north of that, and we ended up in alteration, which is typical of a porphyry system, but marginal to, shall we say, the guts of a porphyry system. On top of that, we have these geophysical anomalies, and off to the west of the pits, we have surface expressions of copper oxide on surface, minerals called malachite, chrysocolla, etc. And so those are just indicators. Now, why do we feel there might be a relationship between the porphyry and the silver? We can't say for sure, but quite often in deep buried porphyries, further up through the overlying fractures, which might vent up into surface and hot springs and things like that. But you get what are called epithermal deposits that can be rich in silver and or gold. So is the relationship between the two? Is there a deep buried porphyry? We're in what's called the Walker Lane trend of mineralization, which runs up the western side of Nevada. And just to the northwest of us is a big porphyry event called the HEREIN area. Nevada Copper has had an operating mine there based on being on the periphery of the big HEREIN porphyry event. So do we have a porphyry under Candelaria? Early stage, hard to know. But again, porphyry exploration is expensive. You're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. In the instance of Oyu Tolgoi in Mongolia, the price tag came over $15 billion before they really started getting into production. So that's something we would consider maybe parceling out to a partner. But we need to do a bit more work first to hopefully identify better targets.
What I also noticed that kind of got me curious and maybe a little bit concerned from the cost perspective, and cost of the test is part of one of my three criteria that I stole from Craig Perry, but it was the presence of multiple east northeast trending normal faults that's resulted in structural blocks within the displacements, right? What's the risk of that faulting has segmentized the mineralized zones and potentially isolating higher grade blocks or resulting in continuity challenges at depth, or potentially maybe it's the right setting for a porphyry, but it displaced it for you and it's no longer on your package?
Well, our package is big enough that if it was just a normal fault and a down-dropped block, which might be true in the northern part of our property, by the way, it would still be on our property, or a good size of it would be. There might be some spilling off the property, but our geophysics doesn't indicate that just yet. But geophysics is geophysics. We need to get out, do more exploration, do some drilling before we're going to be concerned about, do we have a target? And is it worthwhile trying to develop that target? As I said, could be quite expensive. But geological speaking, yeah, there could be some faulting. That's true in any situation that we want to talk about.
The second thing I noticed or started thinking about was depth, because your oxides of Candelaria go to about 650 feet deep, not meters.
Feet.
So, yeah.
Well, essentially, yeah, it's variable, and there's no fixed depth. And this is where your faulting comes in. Okay, let's say a fault comes up through the Candelaria open pits. Because of that faulting, you're getting probably more surface rainwater, surface elements that go down deeper and may extend the oxidization deeper in the area of those faults, where you get more sulfide closer to the surface away from those faults. So it's a very undulating surface. It's not a fixed depth, okay? Right now, what we're seeing is oxide just near the surface, probably within 100 to 150 meters of the surface. Below that, we're getting mixed oxide and sulfide in variable amounts, depending where we put a drill. If we go through one of these fault zones, we're going to see more oxide. We go through one more fresh, we see a little bit more sulfide. But we're not overly concerned with that, because the metallurgical testing that you spoke about earlier, we did on mixed oxide sulfide, and that was giving us a 66% recoveries versus the original Kinross recoveries of 51%, or a 30% increase over the Kinross recoveries. Now, as we go down deeper, our deepest hole right now is about 500 meters. Okay, so 1,500 feet. That area seems to be having more sulfide, and that's why we are conjecturing that as we continue down dip, and we haven't drilled it yet, that it'll probably go into solid sulfide, which is not a bad thing, but it would be for future operation, because then we would have to change the processing system to one where we employ what's called flotation.
Again, sounds complicated, sounds expensive to drill. So it would make more sense to me if it's a JV drilling it, or spending money on a JV partner in that case. You do say better porphyry potential or more porphyry potential in Arizona. How come? What's the thesis?
Okay. Let's leave Candelaria for the moment, and we'll go down to Phoenix Silver. Phoenix Silver is just outside the town of Globe, Arizona. Globe is a historic silver producing area, but also a historic porphyry copper producing area. There is a belt that, if you want to really extend it, goes over 100 kilometers, but in the vicinity of our property, about 50 kilometers. Immediately across the valley to the southwest of us, and you can see photos on our website of us standing holding copper samples, or the drill with the operations of Freeport McMoran right across the valley from us. And that's the big porphyry copper Miami complex. Not only is there Miami, as you go further along that belt to the southwest, you get Capstone Mining, the Pinto Valley project. You get KGHM out of Poland that was operating the Carlotta property. You get the old Superior and Magma mines, which were porphyry copper, and the Silver King, which was silver. Across just a little bit beyond that is the now Resolution deep porphyry deposit that is being co-developed by Rio Tinto and BHP. They're trying to get that permitted. As you come back closer to our property, there's a brand new discovery called the Ocelot project by BHP. That's within 5 kilometers of our property and lies immediately along strike from our property based on that strong belt trend. They have reported in their annual general report several intercepts of over 250 meters of 0.6 to 0.7% porphyry copper. It's one of their major exploration components this year. On top of that, they are just underneath the old Dominion mine, which was one of the original mines in the Globe area that had big vein deposits of copper, lead, zinc, silver, and gold. All that trends northwards under our property. We're a little higher. We're up on the hills where we see these big vein, silver vein fragments, several structures, but down on the lower parts in the southern part of our property, we're picking up multiple select and chip samples that have all returned greater than 1% copper with good silver values as well. We're currently flying the project. We're doing what's called an airborne ZTEM survey, which is an electromagnetic survey with the idea of, will we be able to pick out what we believe to represent alteration systems that could be associated with a buried porphyry on our property.
But it would be essentially the silver mineralization, and this is forward-looking, it's kind of speculating at this point because you don't know until you drill it, but it's the silver mineralization overprinting a potential porphyry and not the other way around, I suppose.
Or is it overprinting, or is it, well, there's several theories here, and again, we don't know until we do more testing. Is silver mineralization something which was there earlier, has been suggested by the Arizona State geologist? By earlier, more akin to what we see in Cobalt, Ontario, Canada, where you see big, rich Precambrian silver deposits? Or is it something which is the upper level expression of a big porphyry event? As I said, above porphyry deposits, you can get in the overlying fracture zones, epithermal deposits that are rich in silver and or gold.
Well, can you look?
But
can you? I understand you don't know because you haven't drilled it, but can you look toward McMorris and Buckeye to see how they've dealt with it or what they've come up with over the years? Because I know that the silver mineralization is similar to those other mines in the Arizona Silver Belt.
Yeah, and the McMorris is pretty inactive. I don't think a lot has been done there in many years, but they had some pretty good native silver reported in their veins, and I think they went down quite deep. I think they went down several hundred, if not more than 1,000 feet in terms of producing silver. But that was back in the day. The Buckeye is the one that's currently being worked on. Haven't seen a lot of news come out of late on that, and so we're kind of monitoring it. Is that directly related to what we're finding on our project? I wouldn't be surprised that it was, but I can't say for sure until we do more extensive work on our project.
Yeah, I suppose a similar answer would be if I asked you about the lithologies here and whether the rocks are I don't know how to put this geologically, so I'll just say it the way I know, but are the rocks the right type that could have been mineralized by a mineralization event of the sort that you think happened there?
Well, essentially, as I said, there's two schools of thought. The host rock, one of the host rocks that we believe the silver veins are set in, is called technically a Proterozoic diabase. Diabase is just a type of intrusive rock, okay? Could come in as a big porphyry event. It could come in as big sills or dikes or whatever. That rock is old. It's Precambrian in age. They're very similar to what you see in Cobalt, Ontario, Canada. Are these old silver veins related to that phase of mineralization? But it's been intruded by a much younger, an event called a Cretaceous Tertiary, which is hundreds of millions of years younger than the Precambrian. It's around the age of the dinosaurs that this stuff came in, and it is what's called a big major porphyry belt, what's called the Laramide intrusive series throughout Nevada that hosts, and Arizona that host multiple porphyry deposit. That hosts the Miami complex at Freeport-McMoRan right across the valley from us. It hosts the Ocelot project being developed by BHP right along strike from us. Could that be the source of the silver mineralization that was superimposed upon this older diabase? We just don't have the answers. We're working on it, but we don't know yet.
Well, you're working on it, but this drill program is really only 2,500 meters. Yep. I said, what is a 40 holes, so 60 to 65 meter average depth. That's not really going to tell you much about the potential for a porphyry, is it?
No, that's why we're doing the ZTEM airborne geophysical survey. And do we have essentially anomalies that could be reflective of big alteration systems that would be more associated with a porphyry event than narrow veins? We don't anticipate the ZTEM survey to pick up narrow veins.
Could it be stockworks?
The silver veins, the amount of silver we're seeing in these vein fragments would be very, very unique if it was related to a porphyry stockwork. Very, very unique. It'd be more related to a higher level epithermal system, or, as I said, one of these older Precambrian events that seem to have these types of rich mineralized events.
But the silver is in association with quartz and carbonate here, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. You are correct.
How does this impact the predictability of what's happening here? Does it tell you anything about potential high-grade zones at depth? Are there any challenges that you foresee from that?
Well, there's always challenges when you're dealing with vein systems and high-grade silver and or gold systems. They can be lensy, they can be potty. You can put a drill hole down and you can see good mineralization off to the side of it, and you totally miss it because these things are lensy and potty. That's the nature of exploration.
Could it be, and this might be, well, I just started reading about some other stuff and kind of went down a rabbit hole earlier. But given Arizona's climate and kind of surface exposure of these rocks, could it be that the visible silver fragments are not a product of underground enrichment, but it all happened kind of at surface oxidation processes, essentially?
Well, that would be called supergene mineralization. That's a phrase. Essentially, the difference between an epithermal vein-hosted system and a supergene system, both are low temperature systems, both can have quartz. So there's no guarantee it's one or the other. That's why we're drilling. We need to find out the answers to this. We do know that there are structures which have been looked at on surface. And as you said, they do host quartz and carbonate, and periodically they host good silver grades. And sometimes in the south of the property, they hold fantastic copper grades. Is there an association between that? Is there not? Or are they two separate events? We don't know.
How thick is that cover, by the way, that you have there? I believe I read about that somewhere as well.
No, I think what we said was there's not a lot of outcrop. Okay. The cover is variable because it's undulating hills, so it could be quite thick in the valleys and thinner up on the surface. These big vein fragments, the big 417 pounder or just under 200 kilogram vein fragment, which is very, very angular and unabraded, by the way, which means that it can't have traveled far because these silver, they break apart very easily. This is why we targeted the structures just upslope from where these fragments were found. And we have seen the fragments in little the veins, the structures, I should say, in little outcrops in the valleys, but on surface, there's very little outcrop. That's why this has been largely ignored. That's why this property was never drilled in the past.
Would it make sense for you in the back of these drill holes to do downhole EM?
Possibly, and only, and we're thinking of, you said the average depth of the holes would be 60 meters. Well, that may be true if we were drilling every single hole to the same depth, but we might do some deeper holes as well, and a mixture. And the deeper holes, it might be worthwhile doing that, particularly if in the deeper holes we start getting into some sulfide type mineralization. But this is all speculative. We don't know yet. Mm-hmm.
When are you going to know? When do we see some news release coming out of that? Are you going to batch it hole by hole? How do you want to release it?
No, I won't do hole by hole. I never do that. And plus we're waiting, of course, anywhere for between 6 and 12 weeks to get results for assays, which is kind of normal these days, which is unfortunate but true. So you're probably not going to see much come out before the new year.
Oh, okay. Everything else is
the program won't finish until probably into early December, is my guess.
okay. But those are, 40 holes. So I'm expecting a couple of news releases. I don't expect they're all going to be in one news release.
Yeah, as we get results back, we'll put something out, but we haven't got anything back to date.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's 40 holes, 17 pads, I believe, that are permitted.
13 are permitted.
13, that's right.
Yeah. And will we drill the full 40 holes? If we decide to do a couple of deeper holes, we may have to cut the number of holes short.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what's permitted. Okay. Because that's where I wanted to go with this. How is permitting for you in Arizona? Is this BLM land? Is it, what's the process for you?
Yeah, permit is slower in Arizona than it is for us in Nevada. It's because this is forestry land. This is not BLM land, it's forestry. And they're a little bit slower moving, but we're in one of the better forestry jurisdictions because there's so much mining and exploration activity throughout the area that we're in. So they have a good understanding of what we do.
How's the water situation in Arizona relative to Nevada?
It depends on where you are. We're fortunate that we're right across the valley from Freeport. They have quite a bit of water there, and they're willing to share. Right now, we're getting our drilling water from the city, and we just purchase it and truck it up to the site.
So you don't need specific permits, but I suppose you'd want to because it's supposedly more expensive.
If we want to drill water wells on our property, we would then have to go through the permitting process. Yes.
And that all depends on, I suppose, this current drill program, what's going to come up from the Corps.
Yeah, it might depend on additional drill programs. We're not going to start developing our own water resources until we know there's a need.
Yeah. So what would that be? Like, how would you, and we've been talking kind of broad and wide here, and it's been a good first pass conversation. I appreciate the insights, but how would you summarize success? Like, what would success be if we're talking at the end of this drill program? So we're talking sometime Q1 next year. You have a PA, the drilling is completed. What does it take to make Greg happy?
Well, I'm generally a happy guy, so there it is. But on top of that, I would like to see silver prices stay healthy. Above 30 would be perfect. I would like that. I would like to see good metallurgical results from our testing. at Candelaria so that we can proceed with a what I think will be a fairly interesting economic study. From there, we can move forward, hopefully a little more rapidly, although the engineers will tell us how fast we can move. And then at Phoenix Silver, we'd like to get a better understanding of what is the nature of these rich silver vein fragments. And the other thing that I would like to see is, do we have any decent ZTEM anomalies that could be indicative of underlying alteration systems that would essentially suggest to us that we've got some targets to do some porphyry drilling with.
That was a wonderful summary right there.
Yeah, and Cherokee, early stage, a great project, 12 kilometers of really good surface values in the north. They're in good silver copper with good epithermal vuggy boiling point textures. So are we in an epithermal system? To the south, they're more silver and gold, suggesting if we are in that system, they're higher up. And it was drilled in the 1980s for porphyry moly. So is there a big underlying porphyry? We flew the project, big mag survey, and there's a big bullseye target on the south side of the project that could be suggestive of a deep underlying porphyry. So Cherokee is an interesting one as well. We just don't have the bandwidth to be able to develop all three at the same time right now.
I think vuggy must be one of my favorite words as a non-native English speaker. I don't know, it does something for me.
Okay.
Greg, this has been a good overview. Thank you so much for that summary at the end. It was great. What am I forgetting to ask you, though, here at the end? What else is important that we should be talking about that I'm failing to bring out?
Well, we do have some interesting shareholders as well. I think you mentioned the larger shareholder, of course, is Eric Sprott, who's well known in terms of his interest in silver around the world, but he's also interested in other commodities as well. We just recently, in our last financing, brought in a big institutional group out of London called Jupiter. They're very long-term players, and we do have over 20 smaller funds invested in our company. So we do have, a good following. On top of that, we've done several financings over the life of the project from 2016 when we were first formed until now. We've never used a brokerage house to raise funds. We've only brought in close investors into the company, and most of them have been very good at reinvesting.
Would your expectation be that Eric is going to keep coming back into financing? Is that what he's telling you when you guys talk?
He's hit and miss, like he is in everything, Sometimes he invests and sometimes he doesn't. He's invested 4 times in our company to date. And will he continue to do so? Don't know. Hard to say. And yeah, I guess it depends on what's the outlook for silver markets and how are we moving forward with our projects. Those are very important components.
Awesome. And that's Greg Crow of Silver One Resources, SVE on the TSXV in Canada. Thank you so much for doing this, sir.
Thanks, Antonio.